In the heart of 1936 London, a traitor lurks in the War Office's highest ranks, leaking secrets that could doom Britain's defences. When a clerk is found murdered, clutching a monogrammed handkerchief, Hercule Poirot is summoned to unravel a web of deception. With 4 powerful suspects, charming diplomat, a brilliant codebreaker, a gruff colonel, and a nervous advisor, Poirot's little grey cells face their toughest test. One tiny clue will expose the traitor, but time is running out, and the next betrayal could spark a national crisis. Can Poirot solve the mystery before the enemy strikes again? Chapter 1. The urgent summons. The late autumn rain pattered against the tall windows of Hercule Poirot's London flat, a steady rhythm that seemed to underscore the detective's precise movements as he adjusted the alignment of his silver cigarette case on the mahogany desk. The room, a study in order and symmetry, reflected Poirot's meticulous nature. The bookshelves were lined with volumes arranged by height. The porcelain coffee cups gleamed in their cabinet, and the fire in the grate cast a warm glow over the polished furniture. Poirot, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his moustache waxed to perfection, was in the midst of savouring a tisane when a sharp knock at the door disrupted the tranquillity. "Intres," Poirot called, his voice carrying a faint Belgian lilt, undimmed by years in England. The door swung open to reveal Captain Arthur Hastings, his loyal friend and occasional chronicler, shaking rain from his overcoat. Hastings' face, usually cheerful, bore a look of urgency that made Poirot's dark eyes narrow. "Poirot, old chap, I hope I'm not interrupting," Hastings began, hanging his coat on the rack with a haste that betrayed his agitation. "I've just come from Whitehall. There's trouble, serious trouble, and they're asking for you specifically." Poirot raised an eyebrow, setting his tisane down with deliberate care. "Mon ami, you arrive like a storm, all bluster and no calm. What is this trouble in Whitehall, and why does it require the services of Hercule Poirot?" Hastings ran a hand through his damp hair, his expression grave. "It's the War Office, Poirot. They've got a crisis on their hands. Top secret military plans have been leaked to a foreign power. They suspect a traitor in their highest ranks, and it's causing an absolute panic. General Sir Alistair Conway himself sent me to fetch you. He wants you at the War Office tonight, discreetly." Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on the arm of his chair, a sign that his mind was already at work. A traitor in the War Office. C'est intéressant. And why, Hastings, do they call upon a private detective, however brilliant, for matters of national security? "They trust you," Hastings replied simply. "Your reputation, you know, solving the unsolvable. Conway said they need someone outside the usual channels, someone with your, what do you call them, little grey cells." Poirot permitted himself a small smile. "Bean, the little grey cells, they are always ready. Tell me, Hastings, what details do you have of this affair?" Hastings sank into an armchair, his brow furrowed. "Not much, I'm afraid." Conway was tight-lipped, said it's too sensitive to discuss outside a secure room. "But there's more. A junior clerk named Thomas Reed was found dead last night, stabbed in an alley near the War Office. They're not sure if it's connected, but the timing's suspicious. Conway's convinced the leak and the murder are linked." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "A murder and a traitor. The plot, it thickens. Nan. Very well, Hastings. We shall go to the War Office. But first I must prepare. One does not meet a general in disarray." As Poirot adjusted his tie in the mirror, Hastings watched with a mix of amusement and impatience. "You're as fastidious as ever, Poirot. Surely a general won't care about the precise angle of your moustache. Mon cher Hastings. Poirot replied, turning to face him, the appearance. It is not merely vanity. It is order, method, discipline. The mind that is orderly in its habits is the mind that sees clearly through the fog of deception. Now, let us depart. The War Office loomed through the London drizzle, its stone facade imposing under the dim streetlights. Poirot and Hastings were ushered through a side entrance by a stern-faced sergeant, who led them down a maze of corridors lined with portraits of grim military men. The air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and old leather, a testament to the institution's long history. At last, they reached a heavy oak door, where the sergeant knocked twice before stepping aside. Inside, General Sir Alister Conway stood behind a massive desk, his silver hair and ramrod posture giving him the air of a man who had seen battle and emerged unyielding. His uniform was immaculate, the medals glinting in the lamplight. Beside him stood Chief Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard, his familiar face creased with worry. Two other figures were present, a tall man with a hawkish nose and a woman, whose sharp eyes darted to Poirot the moment he entered. "Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings, thank you for coming on such short notice," Conway said, his voice clipped but courteous. "This is Lord Reginald Ashford, our senior diplomat, and Lady Margaret Vernon, head of our cryptography unit. They are aware of the situation, though I must stress the need for absolute discretion." Poirot bowed slightly. "Monsieur the General, discretion is the cornerstone of my profession. Permit me to assure you that Hercule Poirot will guard your secrets as if they were his own. Now, Seaview plot, tell me of this crisis." Conway gestured to the chairs, and the group sat, though the tension in the room was palpable. 3 weeks ago, Conway began. "We discovered that detailed plans for a new naval defense system, codenamed Project Aegis, had been compromised. These plans, if in the wrong hands, could cripple our coastal defenses. The information could only have come from someone with access to the highest levels of the War Office. We've narrowed it down to 4 individuals with such clearance: Lord Ashford, Lady Vernon, Colonel Harold Blake, and Sir Edward Langley." Poirot's gaze flicked to Ashford and Vernon. Lord Ashford, in his early 50s, had the polished charm of a seasoned diplomat, his tailored suit and easy smile masking a guarded demeanor. Lady Vernon, younger, perhaps 40, had an air of intellectual intensity, her fingers drumming lightly on the arm of her chair. Poirot noted their reactions, lack thereof to Conway's words. "And this murder, this Thomas Reed?" Poirot said, turning to Japp. "What is known of it?" Japp cleared his throat. "Reed was a clerk in the cryptography department, worked under Lady Vernon. Found last night in an alley off Whitehall, stabbed through the heart. No witnesses, no murder weapon. The police are calling it a robbery, but there's no sign his wallet was taken. Just a handkerchief found nearby, monogrammed with R.A. Could be a clue, could be nothing." Poirot's eyes lit up at the mention of the handkerchief, but he said nothing, merely nodding for Conway to continue. "We can't afford another leak," Conway said, his voice low. "The Prime Minister is breathing down my neck, and the press is sniffing around. If word gets out that we've got a traitor in our ranks, it'll be a national scandal. Mr. Poirot, we need you to find the traitor before they strike again and determine if Reed's death is part of this treachery." Poirot leaned back, his hands folded neatly. "Very well, General. I shall require access to the offices of the 4 individuals you suspect, as well as any documents pertaining to Project Aegis, and I must see the scene of this murder. The little details, they often speak louder than the grand pronouncements." Lord Ashford spoke for the first time, his voice smooth as silk. With all due respect, Mr. Poirot, do you really think you can succeed where our own security has failed? This is a matter of state, not a parlour game. Poirot's smile was polite but steely. Monsieur Ashford, to Hercule Poirot, all mysteries are a game of the mind, and I do not lose. Now, tell me, where were you last night when this poor clerk met his end? Ashford blinked, caught off guard. I was at my club, the Athenaeum, dining with colleagues. Easily verified. And you, Madame Vernon? Poirot asked, turning to the cryptographer. Lady Vernon's eyes narrowed. I was working late in my office, alone. My work is sensitive, Mr. Poirot, and I don't keep company while breaking codes. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. And the others, Colonel Blake, Sir Edward Langley. They're away on assignments, Conway said. Blake's inspecting a base in Dover, and Langley's at a conference in Paris. They'll be back tomorrow, and you can question them then. Bon, Poirot said. Then let us begin with the scene of the crime. Inspector Japp, you will accompany us. Japp nodded, rising. Right, let's get to it. The alley's not far, but it's a grim spot. The alley was a narrow, cobbled passage behind a row of government buildings, its walls slick with rain and grime. A constable stood guard, his lantern casting long shadows. Poirot moved with surprising agility for a man of his fastidious nature, his eyes scanning the ground, the walls, the debris. Hastings shivered in his coat, while Japp pointed out the spot where Reed's body had been found. Here, Japp said, indicating a chalk outline on the cobblestones. Stabbed clean through, poor blighter. No struggle, from what we can tell. The handkerchief was over there, by that crate. Poirot crouched, his gloved fingers hovering over the spot. The handkerchief was gone, taken as evidence, but Poirot's gaze lingered on the surrounding area. He picked up a small, muddy scrap of paper-torn tram ticket-and tucked it into his pocket. Curio, he murmured. A clerk, alone at night, in such a place. Why was he here, I wonder? Meeting someone, maybe. Hastings suggested. A rendezvous gone wrong. Perhaps, Poirot said, rising. But a rendezvous with whom? And why the handkerchief with the initials R.A.? It is too convenient. None. A clue left for us to find, perhaps to mislead. Japp snorted. You're seeing conspiracies already, Poirot. Could just be Ashford's, dropped by accident. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Accidents, Inspector, are rarely so precise. No, this handkerchief, it tells a story. We must learn to read it. Back at the War Office, Poirot requested a private tour of the suspect's offices. Lord Ashford's was a study in elegance. Mahogany panelling, a crystal decanter, and a neatly organized desk. Poirot noted the absence of personal items, no photographs, no mementos, only a few diplomatic cables and a book on chess strategy. Lady Vernon's office, by contrast, was a chaos of papers, code books, and cryptic diagrams pinned to a corkboard. A locked drawer caught Poirot's eye, but Vernon, hovering nearby, insisted it contained only personal notes. As they left, Poirot paused in the corridor, his gaze distant. Hastings, what strikes you about these two? Hastings frowned. Too smooth, like he's hiding something behind that charm. Vernon's sharp as a tack, but she's defensive, almost protective of her work. Precisement, Poirot said. They are both actors on a stage, playing their parts. But which is the villain, and which the pawn? we shall see. That night, back in his flat, Poirot sat by the fire. The tram ticket and a mental image of the handkerchief occupying his thoughts. He sipped his tisane, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The War Office, with its secrets and suspicions, was a puzzle of human nature, ambition, fear, betrayal. The handkerchief was the first thread in the tapestry, and Poirot knew that pulling it would unravel the traitor's carefully woven lies. "Hastings," he said suddenly, startling his friend, who was dozing in an armchair. "Tomorrow we meet Colonel Blake and Sir Edward Langley. And we must learn more of this Thomas Reed. A clerk does not die by chance in such a drama. There is a pattern. Mon ami and Hercule Poirot will find it." As the rain continued to fall outside, Poirot's little grey cells worked tirelessly, already sensing the shape of the conspiracy that would shake the War Office to its core. Chapter 2. The scene of the crime. The morning air hung heavy with the damp chill of London's autumn as Hercule Poirot, Captain Hastings, and Inspector Japp made their way through the narrow, shadowed streets of Whitehall. The urgency of General Sir Alister Conway's summons still lingered in their minds, a weight that pressed upon them as they approached the grim site where Thomas Reed, a junior clerk at the War Office, had met his untimely end. The alley, tucked between two imposing brick buildings, was cordoned off by a pair of uniformed constables, their faces set in grim determination as they kept curious onlookers at bay. The cobblestones glistened with the remnants of an early morning drizzle, and the faint scent of refuse mingled with the sharp attempts of something metallic, blood, perhaps, or the lingering echo of violence. Poirot's small, precise steps echoed softly as he approached the scene, his polished shoes avoiding the puddles with practiced ease. His gloved hands were clasped behind his back, and his sharp green eyes scanned the surroundings with an intensity that belied his calm demeanour. Hastings, ever the loyal companion, followed closely, his taller frame casting a long shadow in the pale light. Japp, his overcoat flapping slightly in the breeze, led the way, his expression a mixture of professional detachment and quiet frustration. "Here we are," Japp said, stopping at the mouth of the alley. "Not a pleasant spot, I'm afraid. Reed was found just there, by that stack of crates." He pointed to a corner where the alley narrowed, partially obscured by a pile of wooden boxes and a rusted dustbin. A chalk outline marked the cobblestones, stark against the damp stone, indicating where the body had lain. Poirot tilted his head, his moustache twitching slightly as he took in the scene. "Mon ami," he said to Japp, his voice soft but commanding attention, "you will please to tell me all that is known of this unfortunate affair." Japp nodded, pulling a small notebook from his pocket. "Thomas Reed, age 26, clerk at the War Office, found dead at approximately 6 this morning by a delivery boy. Stabbed once in the chest, clean wound, likely a narrow blade, possibly a dagger or letter opener. No signs of a struggle, which is odd. Wallet was missing, so the local lads thought it might have been a robbery gone wrong, but," he hesitated, glancing at Poirot. "Well, you'll see for yourself." Poirot's eyes narrowed as he stepped into the alley, his movements deliberate, almost cat-like. Hastings followed, his curiosity piqued but tempered by the sombre atmosphere. The alley was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 men to walk abreast, and the high walls on either side cast it into perpetual shadow. The crates Japp had mentioned were splintered and weathered, stacked haphazardly as if abandoned by some careless merchant. Nearby, a torn newspaper fluttered in the breeze, its edges curling like the pages of a forgotten book. Poirot knelt beside the chalk outline, his gloved fingers hovering just above the ground. His gaze swept over the cobblestones, noting every detail, the faint scuff marks, the smear of mud, the glint of something small and white caught between two stones. He reached down with a delicate motion, retrieving a folded square of fabric handkerchief, pristine save for a faint smudge of dirt along one edge. He held it up to the light, turning it carefully between his fingers. "Tiens," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "What have we here?" Hastings leaned closer, peering over Poirot's shoulder. "A handkerchief. Bit fancy for a place. Like this, isn't it?" "Precisement," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming with interest. The handkerchief was made of fine silk, its edges neatly hemmed, and embroidered in one corner were the initials R.A. in elegant, looping script. "This is not the possession of a junior clerk, I think. No, this belongs to someone of refinement, of status." Japp raised an eyebrow. "You think it's a clue, then? Not just something dropped by a passerby?" Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "In the affairs of Hercule Poirot, mon ami, there are no coincidences. This handkerchief, it is out of place, Nan. A thing of luxury in a place of squalor. We must ask ourselves, why is it here?" Hastings frowned, his mind already racing. "R.A.," he said thoughtfully. "Could it be Lord Ashford's? His initials match, don't they?" Poirot inclined his head, neither confirming nor denying. "It is a possibility, Captain Hastings, but we must not leap to conclusions. The little grey cells, they must work methodically, always methodically." Japp snorted softly. "Well, whoever it belongs to, it's not much to go on. We've got no witnesses, no murder weapon, and precious little else. The coroner's report should be ready by tomorrow, but I'm not holding my breath for miracles." Poirot stood, brushing a speck of dust from his coat. "Miracles, Inspector, are not required when one has order and method. Tell me, where was this Monsieur Reed employed at the War Office, and what was his role?" Japp flipped through his notebook. He was a junior clerk in the Naval Defense Division. Mostly clerical work, filing, copying documents, that sort of thing, nothing high level, but he'd have had access to sensitive material, given the nature of the division. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And the leaks of which General Conway spoke, these classified plans for the naval defense system, could a clerk, such as Reed, have been involved?" Japp hesitated. "It's possible. He wasn't senior enough to have direct access to the plans, but clerks handle all sorts of paperwork. If someone higher up was careless, or if he was nosy," he trailed off, shrugging. "Still, it's a stretch to think a clerk like him was the mastermind behind a leak to a foreign power." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone enigmatic. "But a clerk, he is like the cog in a great machine, Nan. Unnoticed, yet essential, and sometimes it is the smallest cog that causes the machine to falter." Hastings, who had been pacing the alley, paused to examine the crates. "Do you think Reed was killed here, Poirot? Or was the body moved?" Poirot turned, his gaze following Hastings' line of sight. "An excellent question, mon ami. Let us consider." He approached the crates, his eyes scanning the ground for further clues. The cobblestones were uneven, worn smooth in places by years of foot traffic, but there were no obvious signs of a scuffle, no torn clothing, no blood splattered beyond the chalk outline. "The absence of struggle, it is curious," Poirot mused. "A single stab, clean and precise. This suggests either great skill or great surprise." "Surprise?" Hastings asked. "You mean he knew his attacker?" "Perhaps," Poirot said. "Or perhaps he was taken unawares in a moment of distraction." We must learn more of this Thomas, read his habits, his acquaintances, his secrets. Japp sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I've got men canvassing the area, but so far, no one saw or heard anything. This alley's off the main thoroughfare, and it was dark when the murder happened. We're lucky the delivery boy stumbled across the body at all. Poirot's gaze drifted upward to the narrow strip of sky visible between the buildings. Luck, Inspector, is a poor substitute for observation. Tell me, was anything else found near the body? A weapon, perhaps, or some other item? A weapon, perhaps, or some other item. Japp shook his head. Nothing but the handkerchief you've got there. The lads searched the alley top to bottom. If there was anything else, it's long gone. Poirot nodded, tucking the handkerchief carefully into a small evidence bag he produced from his pocket. Very well, I shall keep this for now. It may yet speak to us, in its own way. The trio spent the next hour combing the alley, though little else of note was found. The crates yielded nothing but a few scraps of paper delivery receipts, meaningless in context. The dustbin contained only refuse, and the walls bore no telltale marks of a struggle. Yet Poirot's attention remained fixed, his mind clearly at work, piecing together the fragments of the scene as they prepared to leave. Hastings glanced back at the chalk outline, a shiver running through him. It's a grim business, Poirot. A young man like Reed, cut down in a place like this. Do you really think his death is tied to the leaks? Poirot's expression was unreadable. The timing, mon ami, it is too perfect. A clerk in the Naval Defense Division, dead at the very moment when secrets are slipping through our fingers. No, this is no mere robbery. There is a purpose here, a design, and we shall uncover it. They returned to the main street, where a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the presence of the police. Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the faces, searching for anything out of place, a flicker of guilt, a too keen interest. But the onlookers were ordinary Londoners, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. A newsboy shouted headlines nearby, his voice carrying over the murmur of the crowd, and Poirot paused to listen. War Office clerk found dead, the boy cried. Murder in Whitehall. Read all about it. Poirot's lips tightened. The press, they are swift, are they not? This will complicate matters. Japp grunted. Can't keep a lid on something like this. By tonight, every paper in London will be screaming about it. Makes our job harder, that's for sure. Perhaps, Poirot said, his tone thoughtful. Or perhaps it will flush our quarry from hiding. A guilty man, he does not always remain calm when the world begins to whisper of his crimes. They made their way back to the War Office, where General Conway awaited them in his austere office. The room was all dark wood and polished brass, with maps and charts lining the walls, a testament to the weight of the responsibilities borne. Within, Conway rose as they entered, his weathered face etched with concern. Well, gentlemen, he asked, his voice clipped. What have you found? Poirot recounted their findings, mentioning the handkerchief and its initials, but withholding his suspicions for now. The death of Monsieur Reed is no simple matter, he concluded. There is a connection to the leaks, I am certain, but we must proceed with care. The traitor, he is cunning, and he will not reveal himself easily. Conway nodded, his jaw tight. I trust you'll get to the bottom of this, Poirot. The security of the nation is at stake. If there's a traitor among us, I want them rooted. Out quickly and quietly, Poirot inclined his head. Rest assured, General, the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot are already at work. We shall find your traitor, and we shall bring him to justice. As they left the War Office, the sky had darkened, heavy clouds promising more rain. Hastings glanced at Poirot, who seemed lost in thought, his fingers brushing the pocket where the handkerchief rested. "What now, Poirot?" Hastings asked. "Do we start with Ashford, since the handkerchief points to him?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The handkerchief, it points, yes, but to whom? That is the question, mon ami. We shall begin with the offices of our 4 suspects. Their desks, their papers, their secrets, they will tell us much. And then, perhaps, we shall see the shape of this puzzle more clearly." The investigation had only just begun, but already the threads of deception were weaving a complex tapestry. Poirot, with his unerring instinct for truth, was determined to unravel it, one clue at a time. The handkerchief, with its delicate silk and cryptic initials, was but the first piece. There would be many more before the traitor was unmasked. The alley stayed with Hastings as they walked back to Poirot's flat, its shadows lingering in his mind like a half-remembered dream. He couldn't shake the image of the chalk outline, the stark reality of a life snuffed out in that dismal corner of London. Poirot, however, seemed unperturbed, his mind already racing ahead to the next step. Hastings knew that looked the look of a man whose little grey cells were spinning at full tilt, piecing together a puzzle that, to anyone else, seemed hopelessly opaque. They reached Poirot's flat on Whitehaven Mansions, where the warmth of the fire and the scent of hot chocolate offered a welcome contrast to the chill of the day. Poirot settled into his armchair, the handkerchief now laid out on the table before him, its silk catching the light like a whisper of elegance in an otherwise grim affair. "R.A." Poirot murmured almost to himself. "Reginald Ashford, perhaps. But why leave such a clue behind? It is too obvious, Nan, too convenient." Hastings, pouring himself a cup of tea, frowned. "You think it's a plant, then? Someone trying to throw suspicion onto Ashford?" Eyes twinkled. "You begin to think like Poirot, mon ami. Yes, it is possible. A handkerchief, it is a personal thing, easily lost or easily placed. We must learn more of this Lord Ashford and of the others, their habits, their weaknesses, their secrets. All will be revealed in time." Hastings nodded, though he felt a pang of unease. The War Office, with its labyrinth of loyalties and betrayals, was a far cry from the drawing rooms and country estates where Poirot usually plied his trade. This was a world of high stakes, where a single misstep could cost lives or the security of a nation, as the fire crackled and the rain began to patter against the windows. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "The scene of the crime, it is but the beginning," he said softly. "The alley, the handkerchief, the death of Thomas Reed, they are pieces of a greater whole. And Hercule Poirot, he shall find the truth, no matter how deeply it is hidden." The investigation stretched before them, a maze of clues and suspicions, with a traitor lurking at its heart. For now, the handkerchief was their only lead, a silken thread in a web of deceit. But Poirot was undaunted. With order, method, and the relentless pursuit of truth, he would unravel the mystery and expose the traitor in high ranks. The next morning dawned grey and dreary, the city shrouded in a mist that clung to the streets like a second skin. Poirot and Hastings set out early, their destination the War Office once more. The handkerchief, now safely stored in Poirot's evidence bag, seemed to weigh heavily in his pocket, a constant reminder of the task at hand. Their plan was simple: to examine the offices of the 4 suspects: Lord Ashford, Lady Vernon, Colonel Blake, and Sir Edward Langley, in search of anything that might shed light on Reed's death or the leaks. The War Office was a hive of activity. Clerks and officers moving briskly through its corridors, their faces set in the determined efficiency of wartime bureaucracy. Poirot, with his impeccable suit and air of quiet authority, drew curious glances, but he paid them no mind. His focus was singular, his mind already cataloguing the details of their surroundings. They began with Lord Ashford's office, a spacious room adorned with portraits of naval heroes, and a large mahogany desk that gleamed with polish. Ashford himself was absent, attending a diplomatic function, but his secretary, nervous young woman named Miss Collins, allowed them access. Poirot moved methodically, his gloved hands rifling through papers with the precision of a surgeon. Hastings, less patient, scanned the shelves, hoping for something more obvious. Diary, perhaps, or a hidden compartment. Nothing out of the ordinary, Hastings said after a while, his tone disappointed. Just reports, correspondence, the usual sort of thing. Poirot, examining a stack of letters, paused. The usual, mon ami, is often where the unusual hides. Observe, he held up a letter, its wax seal broken but still intact. The handwriting was elegant, almost too perfect, and addressed to an unnamed recipient in Paris. This is not official. Correspondence, Poirot said. It is personal, yet it is here, among the official documents. Why? Hastings peered at the letter. Could be nothing. Maybe he just forgot to take it home. Perhaps, Poirot said, but his tone suggested. Otherwise, he tucked the letter into his notebook, making a mental note to investigate further. They moved on to Lady Vernon's office, a smaller, more cluttered space filled with books on cryptography and stacks of handwritten notes. Her desk was a chaos of papers, each covered in cryptic symbols and diagrams. Poirot's eyes lit up at the sight, his fingers itching to decipher the codes. But a quick search revealed nothing immediately incriminating. No mention of Reed. No evidence of treason. Colonel Blake's office was next, a stark contrast to the others. It was Spartan, almost austere, with maps pinned to the walls and a single photograph of a younger Blake in uniform. His desk held little of interest: military reports, a few personal effects, and a well-worn copy of Clausewitz's On War. Poirot lingered over the photograph, noting that Cain Blake leaned on even in his youth, a reminder of the injury that still plagued him. Finally, they reached Sir Edward Langley's office, a comfortable space with plush chairs and a view of the Thames. Sir Edward was present, his nervous demeanour evident as he greeted them. "Anything I can do to help, Mr. Poirot," he said, his voice a touch too eager. "This business with Reed, it's dreadful, simply dreadful." Poirot smiled politely, his eyes scanning the room. "Mercy, Sir Edward. We shall not take much of your time. A few questions, perhaps, and a look at your papers." Of course, Sir Edward said, gesturing to his desk. But Poirot's attention was drawn to a small wastebasket in the corner, where a scrap of silk caught his eye. He retrieved it, a torn fragment of a handkerchief, its texture matching the one from the alley. Sir Edward's face paled slightly as Poirot held it up. "A curious thing, Nan," Poirot said, his voice mild but his eyes sharp. "Silk, like our clue from the crime scene. You are fond of such fabrics, Sir Edward." Sir Edward laughed, a nervous sound. "Oh, that. Just an old rag, I'm sure. I must have torn it and tossed it away." Poirot nodded, but his mind was racing. 2 handkerchiefs, both of fine silk. both linked to men of high status. The coincidence was too great to ignore. He tucked the fragment away, promising himself a visit to the tailor who had crafted them. As they left Sir Edward's office, Hastings whispered, "Do you think he's our man, Poirot? That handkerchief is damning." "Isn't it?" Poirot's expression was inscrutable. "Damning, perhaps, but not conclusive. The traitor, he plays a clever game. We must be cleverer still." The day stretched on, filled with interviews and inquiries. But the handkerchief remained the centerpiece of Poirot's thoughts. Its initials, its quality, its presence at the scene, they were a puzzle within a puzzle, a clue that promised to unlock the truth if only he could find the right key. By evening, they returned to Poirot's flat, weary but undeterred. The fire was lit, the hot chocolate prepared, and Poirot sat once more with the handkerchief, turning it over in his hands. Hastings watched, sensing the intensity of his friend's focus. "What's next, Poirot?" he asked. "The tailor? Or do we confront Ashford about the handkerchief?" Poirot's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "The tailor, mon ami. We shall learn the origins of this silk, and perhaps it will tell us who seeks to deceive us. But first, we must consider the man read himself. Who was he? What did he know? The answers, they lie not only in the alley, but in the heart of the War Office itself. The investigation was far from over, but Poirot felt the stirrings of progress. The scene of the crime had yielded its first clue, and though the path ahead was fraught with deception, he was confident that his little grey cells would prevail. The traitor, whoever they were, could not hide forever, not from Hercule Poirot. Chapter 3. The War Office Interviews. Hercule Poirot adjusted his perfectly knotted tie, his sharp eyes scanning the austere corridors of the War Office. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and the faint taint of ink, a testament to the bureaucratic machine that churned within these walls. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings strode with a mix of curiosity and unease, his military bearing still evident despite his civilian attire. Inspector Japp, ever the pragmatist, followed closely, his notebook tucked under his arm, ready to jot down anything of significance. The trio had been summoned to this imposing edifice to unravel a mystery that threatened the very security of the National League of Classified Naval Defense Plans. And now, the murder of a junior clerk named Thomas Reed. The War Office was a labyrinth of power, its high ceilings and heavy oak doors exuding authority. General Sir Alistair Conway had arranged for Poirot to conduct interviews with the 4 high-ranking officials under suspicion: Lord Reginald Ashford, Lady Margaret Vernon, Colonel Harold Blake, and Sir Edward Langley. Each was a pillar of influence, their loyalty unquestioned until now. Poirot's task was to probe their defences, to find the crack in their polished facades that would reveal the traitor among them. As they approached the first interview room, Poirot paused his gloved hand, resting lightly on the door handle. "Mon ami," he said to Hastings, his voice low but precise, "observe not only what is said, but what is not said. The eyes, the hands, the smallest twitch, these are the languages of guilt." Hastings nodded, though he privately thought Poirot's penchant for theatrics bordered on the excessive. Japp, meanwhile, gave a grunt of acknowledgement, his focus already on the practicalities of the investigation. The first to be interviewed was Lord Reginald Ashford, a diplomat known for his silver tongue and impeccable tailoring. The door opened, to reveal a man in his early 50s, seated with an air of effortless confidence. His suit, a deep charcoal with a subtle pinstripe, was cut to perfection, and his cufflinks gleamed under the room's electric lights. Ashford rose to greet them, his smile warm but measured, as if he were welcoming guests to a garden party rather than facing scrutiny for treason. "Monsieur Poirot," Ashford said, extending a hand. "A pleasure, though I wish it were under less troubling circumstances." His voice was smooth, each syllable polished by years of diplomatic maneuvering. Poirot shook his hand briefly, his keen eyes noting the faintest tremor in Ashford's gripper, detail that might mean nothing, or everything. "Please, sit," Poirot said, gesturing to the chair. He took his own seat with deliberate care, arranging his notebook on the table before him. Hastings and Japp remained standing, the former watching Ashford with interest, the latter scribbling initial impressions. "You are aware, Lord Ashford, of the gravity of this matter. Classified documents have been compromised, and a young man, Thomas Reed, is dead. What can you tell me of this clerk?" Ashford's expression softened into one of mild regret. "A terrible tragedy, of course, but I'm afraid I barely knew the lad. He was a junior clerk, one of many who shuffle papers in this place. My work keeps me far above such clerical matters." He leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. The picture of composure. Poirot's moustache twitched slightly, a sign Hastings recognized as the detective's skepticism taking root. And yet, Poirot said, "It is curious, is it not, that a mere clerk should be found dead in an alley, so close to secrets of such importance? Did you ever have occasion to speak with him, perhaps in passing?" Ashford's smile faltered, for a fraction of a second, but he recovered swiftly. "Not that I recall. My days are filled with meetings, ambassadors, ministers, you understand. I scarcely have time to notice the staff." His tone was polite but dismissive, as if the question were beneath him. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And these secrets, these plans for the naval defense system, have you handled them directly?" "Of course," Ashford replied, his voice steady. "As a senior diplomat, I review many sensitive documents, but they are handled with the utmost care. I assure you, Monsieur Poirot, I am as horrified as anyone that such information has fallen into the wrong hands." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "And where were you, Lord Ashford, on the night Thomas Reed was killed?" Ashford's fingers brushed the cuff of his sleeve, a gesture so subtle it might have gone unnoticed by anyone but Poirot. "I was at my club, the Athenaeum, dining with colleagues. A late evening, I'm afraid, but I can provide names if needed." "Indeed, we shall verify," Poirot said, his tone pleasant but firm. "One final question, if I may. Have you ever misplaced a handkerchief, perhaps one with your initials?" Ashford's brow furrowed, though his smile remained. "A handkerchief, I suppose I might have. One does lose such things from time to time. Why do you ask?" Poirot waved a hand dismissively. "A small matter, nothing more. Mercy, Lord Ashford. We shall speak again." As Ashford left, Hastings leaned toward Poirot. "He's smooth as silk, isn't he? But that business about not knowing Redu, you believe him?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Belief, Hastings, is a luxury we cannot afford. Lord Ashford is a man who knows how to charm, but charm can hide many things. We shall see." The next interview was with Lady Margaret Vernon, the War Office's renowned codebreaker. She entered the room with the precision of a metronome, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun, her navy dress as crisp as her demeanour. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, met Poirot's without hesitation. There was no warmth in her greeting, only a curt nod as she sat, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Lady Vernon," Poirot began, Your work with ciphers is most impressive. It must require a mind of extraordinary discipline. Her lips pressed into a thin line. It does, and I take it very seriously. I assume you're here to ask about the leaks. Precisement, Poirot said. The plans that were stolen, were they protected by your codes? They were, she said, her voice clipped. My ciphers are unbreakable, Monsieur Poirot. Unless someone with intimate knowledge of them betrays that trust, I assure you, that person is not me. Poirot tilted his head, studying her. And Thomas Reed, the clerk, did you know him? Lady Vernon's eyes flickered, a brief shadow crossing her face. Only in passing. He was one of the clerks who handled administrative tasks for my department. I had no personal dealings with him. Yet he was found dead, Poirot said. Softly, and with him, a handkerchief that does not belong to a clerk. Curious, Nan. Her gaze hardened. If you're suggesting I had anything to do with his death, you're wasting your time. I am loyal to my country, and I have nothing to hide. Poirot's smile was disarming. Of course, Lady Vernon. But tell me, where were you on the night of the murder? I was working late in my office, she said, her tone defiant. Alone. As I often am, my work does not keep regular hours. No witnesses, then? Poirot asked, his voice gentle but probing. Her jaw tightened. None, but I don't need witnesses to prove my loyalty. Poirot nodded, making a small note. Mercy. Lady Vernon, I would like to see your office, if I may. She hesitated, then gave a sharp nod. Very well. But you'll find nothing there to incriminate me. As she left, Japp muttered, She's a tough one. Didn't give an inch. Perhaps, Poirot said, but the ones who give nothing away are often the ones with the most to conceal. Colonel. Harold Blake was next, a bear of a man with a weathered face and a permanent scowl. His uniform was immaculate, the medals on his chest glinting as he limped into the room, leaning heavily on a cane. The injury, Hastings knew, was from a wound, sustained in the Great War, a fact Blake wore as a badge of honor. Monsieur Poirot, Blake said gruffly, lowering himself into the chair with a wince. I don't know what you expect to get out of this. I'm a soldier, not a spy. And yet, Poirot said, the secrets that were stolen concern military strategy, Colonel. Your expertise, I believe. Blake's eyes narrowed. I've served this country for 30 years. I don't take kindly to accusations. No accusations, Colonel Poirot said smoothly. Merely questions. Did you know Thomas Reed? Blake snorted. Never heard of him until he turned up dead. Clerks don't cross my path unless they're bringing me coffee. And the night of his death, Poirot asked, where were you? At a regimental dinner, Blake said, his tone curt. Dozens of men can vouch for me. Check, if you like. We shall, Poirot said. And these naval plans, have you seen them? Blake's hand tightened on his cane. I've seen them, yes. Part of my job. But they're locked away tighter than a drum. If they're leaking, it's not from my end. Poirot made another note. Mercy, Colonel. I would like to inspect your office as well. Blake shrugged, as if it mattered little. Look all you want. You'll find nothing but maps and whiskey. As Blake limped out, Hastings whispered, He's a rough sort, but he seems honest enough. Honesty, Poirot said, is a mask. Like any other, Hastings. We must look beneath it. The final interview was with Sir Edward Langley, the political adviser. He entered the room with a nervous energy, his eyes darting between Poirot, Hastings, and Japp. His suit was well tailored, but slightly rumpled, as if he'd dressed in haste. His hands fidgeted with a pen, betraying his unease. Monsieur Poirot, Sir Edward said, his voice high and strained. I want to help in any way I can. This business with the leaks sits dreadful. Indeed, Poirot said, his tone soothing. You have access to many sensitive documents, I understand. Sir Edward nodded quickly. Yes, but I'm meticulous. About security. I'd never let anything slip. And Thomas Reed? Poirot asked. Did you know him? Sir Edward's fingers tightened on the pen. Only vaguely. He ran errands for the office sometimes. A quiet chap, kept to himself. And your whereabouts on the night he died? Poirot pressed. I was at home, Sir Edward said. Then hesitated. Well, I did step out briefly to meet a colleague at a cafe. A routine matter, nothing more. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A colleague, you say? May I have the name? Sir Edward flushed. It was Lord Ashford, actually. We discussed a trade agreement over coffee. Interesting, Poirot said, making a final note. And one last thing. Have you ever owned a silk handkerchief with the initials R.A.? Sir Edward blinked, clearly startled. No, I don't believe so. My initials are E.L., after all. Merci, Sir Edward, Poirot said, rising. You have been most helpful. As Sir Edward left, Japp closed his notebook with a snap. Well, Poirot, what do you make of that lot? They all seem to have their stories straight. Poirot smiled. Enigmatically, stories, mon ami, are like tapestries. They appear complete, but pull a single thread, and the whole may unravel. I wish to see their officers now. The trio moved through the War Office, escorted by a stern-faced aide. Lord Ashford's office was a study in elegance, with mahogany furniture and shelves lined with leather-bound books. Poirot's eyes swept over the room, noting the meticulous Whodunit papers out of place, no stray items. A man who values control, Poirot murmured, running a finger along the desk. He opened a drawer, finding nothing but neatly arranged stationery. Too perfect, perhaps. Lady Vernon's office was a contrast, cluttered with papers and code-breaking manuals. A locked cabinet caught Poirot's attention, but the aide confirmed it contained only classified ciphers. Poirot lingered over a photograph on her desk. Younger Lady Vernon, with a man in military uniform. Her brother, perhaps. Poirot mused, though he made no comment to the others. Colonel Blake's office was sparse, dominated by a large map of Europe pinned to the wall. A decanter of whiskey sat on a side table, alongside a stack of military journals. Poirot examined the cane resting against the chair, noting its worn handle. A man who leans heavily on his past, he said softly. Sir Edward's office was the most chaotic, with papers strewn across the desk and books piled haphazardly. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he spotted a silk tie draped over a chair, its quality similar to the handkerchief found at the crime scene. He made a mental note but said nothing as they left the War Office. The sky outside had darkened, a light drizzle falling over London. Hastings pulled his coat tighter, glancing at Poirot. Well, old chap, any theories yet? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Theories, Hastings, are like stars many shine, but only one may guide us. Lord Ashford is too smooth, Lady Vernon too guarded, Colonel Blake too dismissive, and Sir Edward too nervous. Each has a secret, I think, but only one is the traitor. Japp chuckled. You're keeping us in suspense, Poirot. Care to share what you're thinking? Poirot shook his head. Not yet, mon ami. The little grey cells, they work, but they need more. how do you say, pieces of the puzzle. We shall dig deeper into their alibis, their offices, their lives. The truth, it hides, but not for long. They parted ways, Japp heading to Scotland Yard to check alibis, Hastings to his flat to ponder the day's events, and Poirot to his own rooms, where he would sit with the tisane and let his mind unravel the threads of deception. The War Office, with its secrets and suspicions, was a battlefield of the mind, and Hercule Poirot was ready to wage war. Chapter 4. A pattern emerges. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Hercule Poirot's London flat, casting a warm glow on the polished mahogany table where he sat, sipping his morning tisane. The delicate aroma of chamomile filled the air, a stark contrast to the grim task at hand. Across from him, Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the faithful companion, pored over a notebook filled with scribbled observations from their visit to the War Office the previous day. The weight of their investigation into the leaked naval defense plans and the murder of Thomas Reed, the junior clerk, hung heavily between them. Poirot's sharp eyes, though, gleamed with the quiet intensity of a man whose mind was already several steps ahead. Mon ami, Poirot said, setting down his cup with deliberate precision, we must now consider the facts with the utmost clarity. The death of this young Reed, it is no mere coincidence. It is a thread in the tapestry of treason, and we must find where it leads. Hastings looked up, his brow furrowed. But Poirot, the police seemed convinced it was a robbery gone wrong. The alley, the stab wound, all points to a random act, doesn't it? Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile, the kind that signalled he was about to unravel and not others couldn't even see. Random, you say? Nan, Hastings. The little grey cells, they protest such simplicity. A clerk in the War Office, privy to secrets, found dead with a monogrammed handkerchief nearby. This is no accident. It is a message, a clue, perhaps. Even a misdirection. We must dig deeper. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp rap at the door. It was Inspector Japp, his face etched with the fatigue of a man who had spent the night chasing leads that led nowhere. He carried a small leather satchel, which he placed on the table with a thud. "Morning, Poirot, Hastings. I've brought what you asked for. Reed's personal effects from his desk at the War Office. Not much, but there's something curious in there. Thought you'd want to see it first." Poirot's eyes lit up as he opened the satchel, his movements precise and deliberate, like a surgeon preparing for an operation. Inside were a few mundane items: a fountain pen, a dog-eared notebook, a few crumpled receipts, and a small, folded piece of paper tucked into an envelope. Poirot's fingers lingered on the envelope, his gaze narrowing as he extracted the paper and unfolded it. The text was a jumble of letters and numbers, incomprehensible at first glance. "A code," Poirot murmured, his voice tinged with excitement. "This, my friends, is no ordinary note. It is a cipher, and it suggests that young Monsieur Reed was involved in matters far beyond his station." Hastings leaned forward, peering at the cryptic scribbles. A code, but why would a junior clerk have something like this? Could he have been the traitor? Poirot shook his head, his expression thoughtful. Possible, but unlikely. A junior clerk does not have the access to leak plans of such magnitude. No, I suspect Reed was a pawn, perhaps a courier, passing information to someone higher up. This note, it is the key. We must decipher it. Japp scratched his chin, skeptical. A cipher, eh? Sounds like something Lady Vernon would know about. She's the codebreaker, after all. Could she be involved? Poirot's eyes gleamed. An excellent observation, Inspector. Lady Vernon's expertise in cryptography makes her a person of interest, does it not? But we must not leap to conclusions. Let us examine the evidence with care. The trio made their way to the War Office, where Poirot had arranged to inspect Reed's desk more thoroughly. The office was a hive of activity, with clerks and typists bustling about, their faces taut with the tension of wartime secrecy. Reed's desk, tucked in a corner of the records department, was unremarkable at first glance, modest wooden affair cluttered with files and stationery. But Poirot's meticulous nature left no detail unexamined. He ran his fingers along the edges of the desk, opened each drawer with care, and inspected every item with the precision of a jeweler examining a gem dot in the bottom drawer, hidden beneath a stack of requisition forms. Poirot found a small ledger. Its pages were filled with mundane entries, dates, times, and lists of documents Red had handled, but one entry caught Poirot's eye. It was a notation dated 3 days before Reed's death. Met with L.V. Rye, cipher training, new code. Assigned, the initials L.V. stood out like a beacon. Lady Vernon, Hastings said, his voice low. She was working with Reed directly. Poirot nodded, his expression inscrutable. Indeed, and yet, during our interview, she claimed no personal connection to the young man. This is most curious, is it not? Japp frowned, his hands on his hips. Sounds like she's hiding something. But why would a codebreaker of her caliber get mixed up with a clerk? And what's this about a new code? Poirot closed the ledger and tucked it into his coat pocket. That, Inspector, is what we must discover. The code in Reed's envelope. It bears the hallmarks of Lady Vernon's work complex, elegant, designed to be unbreakable without the key. If she created it, or taught Red to use it, we must ask why, and for whom. As they left the War Office, Hastings couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The bustling streets of London, filled with soldiers, civilians, and the occasional horse-drawn cart, seemed to hum with an undercurrent of suspicion. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see one of their suspects trailing them, but the crowd revealed nothing unusual. Back at Poirot's flat, the detective set to work on the cipher. He spread the note on his table, surrounded by sheets of paper filled with his own meticulous calculations. Hastings, ever eager to assist, hovered nearby, though he admitted his own attempts at code-breaking were futile. I say, Poirot, how do you even begin with something like this? It's all gibberish to me. Poirot chuckled softly. Patience. Hastings, a cipher is like a locked door. One must find the key, and the key is often hidden in the habits of the one who created it. Lady Vernon, she is a woman of precision, but also of pride. Her ciphers, they reflect this. I suspect this code is based on a substitution cipher, perhaps with a keyword known only to her and her contact. For hours, Poirot worked, his pencil flying across the paper as he tested various combinations. Hastings and Japp watched in silence. The room filled with the soft scratch of graphite and the occasional mutter of French as Poirot wrestled with the puzzle. Finally, he leaned back, a triumphant gleam in his eye. Voila, he said, holding up a sheet of paper. The cipher. It is broken. The message reads, plans delivered, payment received. Meet at Eagle's Nest, 9 p.m. Japp let out a low whistle. The Eagle's Nest, that's a rough pub down by the docks. Not exactly a place for a War Office clerk, nor for a high-ranking traitor, Poirot added, his voice sharp. This meeting It was no doubt with the contact to whom Red passed. The plans. But who was this contact? And why was Reed killed? Hastings rubbed his chin. Could Reed have been the traitor, and his contact turned on him? Poirot shook his head. Nan, Hastings, Reed was a tool, not the mastermind. The traitor is one of our 4 suspects. Lady Vernon, Colonel Blake, or Sir Edward. The question is, which one? Japp stood, pacing the room. Well, that ledger points to Lady Vernon. She lied about knowing Reed, and the cipher's hers. Seems pretty damning to me. Poirot raised a finger. Patience, Inspector. The evidence. It is suggestive, but not conclusive. Lady Vernon's cipher could have been stolen or copied. We must consider all possibilities. For example, the handkerchief with the initials R.A. It points to Lord Ashford, does it not? And yet it is too convenient, too obvious. A clever traitor would not leave such a clue by accident. Hastings brightened, a sudden thought striking him. I say, Poirot, I heard something at the club last night. Lord Ashford's been in a spot of financial trouble, gambling debts, they say. Could that be a motive for treason? Selling secrets? To pay off his creditors? Poirot's eyes narrowed. A motive, yes, but we must verify this. Gambling debts are a common affliction among the aristocracy, but they do not always lead to betrayal. We must speak with Ashford's tailor to confirm the handkerchief, and with his associates to learn more of his financial state. The rest of the day was spent in pursuit of these leads. Poirot and Hastings visited the high-end tailor who had crafted the monogrammed handkerchief found near Reed's body. The tailor, a wiry man with a nervous demeanour, confirmed that both Lord Ashford and Sir Edward Langley were clients, but he could not say definitively to whom the handkerchief belonged. They both ordered the same fine silk, you see, he explained, wringing his hands. It's quite popular among gentlemen of their station. Poirot's expression remained impassive, but his mind was clearly at work. And this handkerchief, it was lost, you say, by Lord Ashford some weeks ago. The tailor nodded. He mentioned it when he came in last. Said he'd misplaced one and needed a replacement. As they left the shop, Hastings whispered, That's awfully convenient for Ashford, isn't it? Claiming he lost it weeks ago. Indeed, Poirot replied, but a clever man might say such a thing to cover his tracks. Or perhaps the handkerchief was taken from him to be used as a false clue. We must keep our minds open, Hastings. Their next stop was a discreet inquiry into Lord Ashford's finances. Through Japp's contacts, they learned that Ashford had indeed been frequenting gambling dens, and his debts were substantial. But there was no evidence of sudden wealth, no sign that he had paid off his creditors with illicit funds. This puzzled Poirot, who had expected a clearer pattern. Perhaps he has not yet received his payment. Poirot mused as they walked back to the flat. Or perhaps he is not the traitor at all. The little grey cells, they are not yet satisfied. That evening, Poirot sat once more at his table, the ciphered note and the ledger spread before him. Hastings watched as the detective's fingers tapped rhythmically, his mind clearly racing. What is it, Poirot? You've got that look again. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The pattern, Hastings, it begins to emerge. The cipher, the handkerchief, the death of Reed, these are not random events. They are the work of a mind that is clever, calculating, hiding in plain sight. But we are close, mon ami, very close. As the clock struck midnight, Poirot rose, his movements brisk. Tomorrow, we return to the War Office. There is more to learn from our suspects, and I believe Lady Vernon has more to tell us. The eagle's nest, it calls to us. We must be ready. Chapter 5. The monogram mystery. Hercule Poirot sat in the quiet elegance of his London flat, the soft glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the room. The monogrammed handkerchief, with its delicate initials, R.A., lay on the polished mahogany table before him, a silent enigma demanding his attention. Its fine silk shimmered faintly, a stark contrast to the grim alley where it had been found, nestled near the lifeless body of Thomas Reed. To Poirot, it was not merely a piece of fabric, but a thread in the intricate tapestry of deceit he was determined to unravel. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled, his eyes narrowed in thought. The little grey cells, as he so fondly called them, were already at work, piecing together the puzzle of the traitor lurking within the War Office. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the faithful companion, sat across from him, sipping a cup of tea with a look of mild impatience. "I say, Poirot," he began, setting his cup down with a gentle clink, "that handkerchief surely points to Lord Ashford, doesn't it? Those initials are his, after all, and with those gambling debts you mentioned, it's not a stretch to think he might have been desperate enough to sell secrets." Poirot's lips curled into a faint, almost indulgent smile. "Mon cher Hastings, you are, as always, quick to seize upon the obvious. But the obvious, it is often the trap laid by the cunning mind. This handkerchief, it is too perfect, Nan. Found so conveniently near the body of poor Monsieur Reed. I suspect it is not a clue left by accident, but a breadcrumb placed to lead us astray." Hastings frowned, his brow furrowing. "You mean to say it was planted? But who would do such a thing, and why?" "That, my friend, is the question," Poirot replied, his voice soft but laced with determination. "The traitor we seek is clever, Hastings. Clever enough to know that a monogrammed handkerchief would draw attention to Lord Ashford. But why choose such an obvious marker? To divert suspicion, perhaps, or to protect the true culprit. We must discover the origins of this handkerchief, for in its threads lies the truth." The morning was crisp as Poirot and Hastings set out from the flat. Their destination, a discreet tailor's shop in Savile Row, renowned for crafting garments for London's elite. The air carried the faint chill of early autumn, and the streets bustled with the usual parade of gentlemen in bowler hats and ladies in fur-trimmed coats. Poirot, impeccably dressed as always, walked with a brisk step, his cane tapping lightly on the pavement. Hastings, struggling to match his friend's pace, glanced at him curiously. "You really think this tailor will know something about the handkerchief?" Hastings asked, his tone skeptical. "It's just a bit of silk, after all, just a bit of silk." Poirot's eyes gleamed with reproach. Nan, Hastings, it is a work of art, a signature of craftsmanship. The silk, it is of the finest quality, woven with a precision that speaks of wealth and status. Such things are not purchased in the common shops. They are bespoke, created for a select few. The tailor, he will know who has ordered such a piece. They arrived at the shop, a modest establishment with a polished brass sign reading Harrington and Sons, bespoke tailors. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, and a tall, thin man with a neatly trimmed moustache greeted them. He introduced himself as Mr. Harrington, the proprietor, and his eyes widened slightly as Poirot produced the handkerchief, holding it delicately between gloved fingers. "Monsieur Harrington," Poirot began, his voice smooth and authoritative, "this handkerchief, it is of your making, is it not? I wish to know who among your clients might possess such an item, monogrammed with the initials R.A. Harrington took the handkerchief, examining it with the practiced eye of a craftsman. He adjusted his spectacles and ran his fingers over the fabric, his expression one of quiet admiration. "This is indeed our work," he said after a moment. "The silk is from lion, a particular weave we import for our most discerning clients. The monogram, too, is our embroidery done by hand, you see, with a specific thread that gives it that subtle sheen. And the initials," Poirot pressed, his gaze fixed on the tailor. "Who among your clients has the initials R.A.?" Harrington hesitated, his professional discretion warring with Poirot's commanding presence. "Well, sir, I can confirm that Lord Reginald Ashford is a client of ours. He has ordered several such handkerchiefs over the years, monogrammed with his initials. But," he paused, his brow creasing, "there is another client, Sir Edward Langley, who has also purchased similar items. His initials are not R.A., of course, but he favours this same silk and style. It's possible, I suppose, that a handkerchief could have been monogrammed for someone else, though that would be unusual." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. "Unusual, you say? Tell me, Monsieur Harrington, is it possible that such a handkerchief could be ordered with another's initials? A gift, perhaps, or a deception?" Harrington's lips tightened, as though the very suggestion offended his professional sensibilities. "It is possible, Mr. Poirot, but highly irregular. We take great care to ensure our work is tailored to the client's specifications. If someone were to order a handkerchief with another's initials, it would require a deliberate request." "And have you received such a request?" Poirot asked, his tone deceptively mild. "Not to my knowledge," Harrington replied, "but I can check our records, if you wish. It would take some time, as we keep detailed ledgers of all orders." Poirot nodded, his expression inscrutable. "Do so, if you please. And one more thing, Monsieur Harrington. These handkerchiefs, they are expensive, Nan. Not the sort of thing one might misplace easily." Harrington gave a small, knowing smile. "Quite expensive, sir. A single handkerchief of this quality could cost more than a month's wages for a clerk like the one you mentioned. They are cherished possessions, not easily lost." "Merci, monsieur," Poirot said, tipping his hat. "You have been most helpful." As they left the shop, Hastings was practically bursting with questions. "Well, Poirot, what do you make of that? Ashford's our man, surely. His initials, his handkerchief, patience." "Hastings," Poirot interrupted, raising a gloved hand. "The handkerchief points to Lord Ashford, yes, but it is too convenient. Why would a man of his intelligence leave such an incriminating item at the scene of a crime? And Sir Edward, he too, is a client of this tailor. His involvement cannot be dismissed. We must consider the possibility that the handkerchief was placed there to cast suspicion on Ashford, while the true culprit remains hidden." They returned to the War Office, where Poirot requested a private meeting with Lord Ashford. The diplomat was, as ever, the picture of charm, his tailored suit immaculate, his smile disarming. He welcomed Poirot and Hastings into his office, a spacious room lined with bookshelves and adorned with a portrait of a stern-faced ancestor. "Mr. Poirot," Ashford said, leaning back in his chair, "I understand you've been poking about with that handkerchief business. I assure you, I've no idea how one of mine ended up in that alley. I lost one a few weeks ago. Careless of me, I know, but these things happen." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "Lost, you say? And when was this, Lord Ashford?" Ashford shrugged, his expression casual. "Oh, 3 or 4 weeks ago, I'd say. I noticed it missing after a dinner at my club. Thought nothing of it at the time. I've got dozens of the things, you know. Dozens, Poirot repeated, his tone thoughtful, and yet, this one, it is found near the body of a murdered clerk. A curious coincidence, Nan. Ashford's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly. Coincidence, indeed. I'm a busy man, Mr. Poirot. I don't have time to go about murdering clerks or leaking secrets. My debts, if you've heard about them, are hardly a secret. A few bad bets at the tables, nothing more. I'm not a traitor. Poirot inclined his head, his expression unreadable. Of course, Lord Ashford. But you will permit me to ask, where were you on the night Thomas Reed was killed? Ashford's eyes narrowed, but he answered smoothly. At my club, as it happens. The Reform Club, to be precise. I dined with several colleagues, and we played cards until late. You're welcome to check with them. Be assured, I shall, Poirot said, rising from his chair. Thank you for your time, Lord Ashford. As they left the office, Hastings whispered, He's awfully smooth, isn't he? Almost too smooth. Do you believe him about losing the handkerchief? Poirot's lips twitched into a wry smile. I believe, Hastings, that Lord Ashford is a man who knows how to present himself. Whether he speaks the truth, that is another matter. We must verify his alibi, and we must speak with Sir Edward. If he, too, possesses such handkerchiefs, then the web of this mystery grows ever more tangled. Their next stop was Sir Edward Langley's office, a contrast to Ashford's in its cluttered simplicity. Papers were stacked haphazardly on the desk, and a faint smell of pipe tobacco lingered in the air. Sir Edward, a wiry man with a nervous demeanour, greeted them with a hesitant smile. His hands fidgeted with a pen as Poirot produced the handkerchief. Sir Edward, Poirot began, This handkerchief, it is of a quality you are familiar with, is it not? Your tailor, Monsieur Harrington, tells me you are a client of his, and that you favour such fine silk. Sir Edward's eyes widened, and he swallowed hard. Well, yes, I suppose I do have a few handkerchiefs like that. But those initials are, they're not mine. Mine are monogrammed with E.L. Indeed, Poirot said, his tone gentle but probing. And yet, the silk, the craftsmanship, is identical to that which you purchase. Tell me, have you ever misplaced such an item? Sir Edward shook his head vigorously. No, I'm quite careful with my things. I don't go leaving handkerchiefs. Lying about in alleys, if that's what you're implying. Poirot's gaze was steady, almost hypnotic. And on the night of Monsieur Reed's murder, where were you, Sir Edward? I was at home, Sir Edward said quickly. Working late in my study, I had papers to review for the War Office. My housekeeper can confirm I didn't leave the house. Very well, Poirot said, rising. We shall speak with your housekeeper. Thank you, Sir Edward. As they stepped into the corridor, Hastings let out a low whistle. He's jumpy, isn't he? Almost as if he's hiding something. Do you think he's our man? Poirot's expression was grave. Sir Edward is nervous, yes, but nervousness is not guilt. We must tread carefully, Hastings. The handkerchief, it is a clue, but it is also a distraction. The traitor wishes us to focus on it, to suspect Lord Ashford, perhaps, but I suspect the truth lies elsewhere. Over the next few days, Poirot and Hastings pursued their inquiries with relentless precision. They visited the Reform Club, where Ashford's alibi was confirmed by two fellow members, though one admitted Ashford had stepped out briefly during the evening to take a telephone call. The timing, however, did not align perfectly with Reed's murder, leaving a sliver of doubt. Sir Edward's housekeeper, a stern woman named Mrs. Baxter, corroborated his claim of staying home, though she noted he had been unusually agitated. That evening, pacing his study until well past midnight, Poirot also requested the tailor's records, which Harrington dutifully provided. The ledgers confirmed that Ashford had ordered a dozen handkerchiefs with the initials R.A. over the past year, while Sir Edward had ordered 6 with his own initials. E.L. No record existed of either man requesting a handkerchief with another's monogram, but Poirot noted that such an order could have been placed discreetly, perhaps through a third party. As the investigation deepened, Poirot found himself returning to the handkerchief's significance. Its presence at the crime scene was no accident. He was certain it was a calculated move, designed to mislead. But who had the motive to frame Lord Ashford, and why? The gambling debts provided a plausible reason for Ashford to betray his country, but his demeanour suggested confidence, not desperation. Sir Edward, on the other hand, seemed rattled, his financial records showing no obvious irregularities. Poirot resolved to dig deeper into both men's backgrounds, as well as those of Lady Vernon and Colonel Blake, whose alibis and connections to Reed remained untested. One evening, as Poirot and Hastings dined at a small restaurant near Baker Street, Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden realization. He set down his fork, his eyes gleaming with that familiar spark of insight. "Hastings," he said, his voice low and urgent, "the handkerchief, it is not merely a clue to the murderer. It is a message. The traitor wishes us to believe Lord Ashford is guilty, but in doing so, they reveal their own hand. We must look beyond the initials, beyond the silk, to the mind that placed it there." Hastings stared, his fork halfway to his mouth. "You mean you know who it is?" "Not yet," Poirot admitted, his smile enigmatic. "But the little grey cells, they are beginning to see the pattern. We must be patient, Hastings, and we must be thorough. The truth, it will reveal itself in time." The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Poirot requested Japp's assistance in obtaining financial records for all four suspects, suspecting that money might be the key to unlocking the traitor's identity. He also revisited the crime scene, examining the alley once more in the hopes of uncovering an overlooked detail. The cobblestones, slick with recent rain, yielded nothing new, but Poirot's keen eyes lingered on the surrounding buildings, noting their proximity to the War Office. It was possible, he mused, that Reed had been killed not in a random robbery, but in a deliberate act to silence him. The handkerchief, then, was not just a misdirection but a taunt, a challenge to Poirot's intellect. As the investigation continued, Poirot began to focus on the relationships between the suspects and Reed, the clerk, though Junior had been privy to sensitive information, and his coded note suggested he was more involved than anyone had realized. Poirot suspected that Reed had stumbled upon the traitor's activities, perhaps blackmailing them or threatening to expose them. The handkerchief, with its incriminating initials, could have been a desperate attempt to shift blame to Ashford, before Reed could reveal the truth. To test this theory, Poirot arranged a second interview with Lady Vernon, whose expertise in cryptography made her a potential link to Reed's coded note. Her office, a stark contrast to Ashford's opulence, was filled with books on mathematics and cipher theory. She greeted Poirot with a cool nod, her sharp eyes betraying a hint of wariness. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, folding her arms, "I've told you everything I know about Thomas Reed. He was a clerk, nothing more. I had no personal dealings with him." Poirot tilted his head, his expression one of polite skepticism. "And yet, madame, the note found in his desk was written in a cipher. Of your own design. A curious coincidence, Nan." Lady Vernon's lips tightened, but she maintained her composure. "My ciphers are used throughout the War Office. It's not surprising that Reed might have come across one. He was ambitious, always poking about where he shouldn't." "Ambitious," Poirot repeated, his voice soft. "Or perhaps he was curious. Curious enough to discover something he should not have." Lady Vernon's eyes flashed, but she said nothing. Poirot thanked her and left, his mind buzzing with possibilities. The coded note, the handkerchief, the suspects, alibis all were pieces of a larger puzzle, and he was determined to fit them together. By the end of the week, Poirot had gathered enough information to form a hypothesis, though he kept it closely guarded, even from Hastings. The handkerchief, he believed, was not Ashford's at all, but a carefully crafted imitation, designed to throw suspicion on a man whose debts made him an easy target. Sir Edward's nervous demeanour and access to the same tailor suggested he might have the means to orchestrate such a deception. But Poirot lacked definitive proof. Colonel Blake's limp and Lady Vernon's cipher were additional threads, each tugging at his intuition, demanding further exploration as he sat in his flat that evening. The handkerchief once again before him, Poirot felt a quiet satisfaction. The mystery was far from solved, but the little grey cells were beginning to align the clues, to see the shape of the truth beneath the layers of deceit. The traitor was close, he knew, hiding behind a mask of respectability. But Hercule Poirot was not a man to be deceived for long. With order and method, he would expose the traitor, and the monogram mystery would be but the first step in unraveling their treachery. Chapter 6. A second betrayal. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Hercule Poirot's London flat, casting a golden glow across the meticulously arranged furniture. The air was thick with the scent of his morning tisane, a delicate blend of herbs that he sipped with measured precision. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated across from him, fidgeted with his teaspoon, his brow furrowed as he recounted the latest developments in their investigation. "Another leak." "Poirot," Hastings said, his voice tinged with exasperation, "just when we thought we were getting somewhere with that handkerchief business, the War Office is in a right state about it. General Conway sent a messenger this morning, urgent, of course. A diplomatic mission's been compromised. Documents meant for an Allied ambassador were intercepted last night." Poirot set his cup down with a soft clink, his moustache twitching as he processed the news. "A second betrayal, mon ami," he murmured, his green eyes narrowing. "This is no coincidence. The traitor grows bold, but boldness often leads to carelessness. Tell me, what do we know of this new incident?" Hastings leaned forward, his hands resting on the polished mahogany table. "A courier was attacked near Victoria Station. Bloke's name is Martin Wells, a reliable sort, been with the War Office for years. He was carrying sensitive documents, details of a trade agreement with the French, I believe. Someone jumped him in a back alley, knocked him out cold. He's alive, thank heavens, but the documents are gone. Wells swears he saw the assailant limping away, though it was dark, and he was half dazed from the blow." Poirot's fingers steepled beneath his chin, his expression unreadable. "A limp, you say? Most interesting. And the documents stolen, but not yet surfaced, I presume?" "Not yet," Hastings confirmed. "Jap's got his men scouring the usual channels, black markets, foreign agents, that sort of thing. But the War Office is convinced it's The same traitor who leaked the naval plans. Conway's practically tearing his hair out, demanding we find the culprit before more damage is done. Poirot rose, his small frame moving with a quiet grace as he crossed to the window. He parted the drapes slightly, gazing out at the bustling London street below. "The limp," he said softly, almost to himself. "It is a detail that demands our attention. And yet it feels deliberate, too convenient, perhaps. We must proceed with care, Hastings. The traitor is playing a game, and we must not be lured into their trap." The War Office was a hive of controlled chaos when Poirot and Hastings arrived. Later that morning, uniformed officers hurried through the corridors, their faces taut with urgency, while clerks shuffled papers with a fervor that bordered on panic. General Sir Alister Conway greeted them in his office, his usually composed demeanor frayed at the edges. "Poirot, thank God you're here," Conway said, rising from behind his desk. His uniform was impeccable, but dark circles underscored his eyes. "This latest breach is a disaster. The French are furious, and if those documents reach the wrong hands, it could jeopardize our entire alliance. Have you made any progress on the traitor?" Poirot inclined his head, his expression serene but alert. "Progress, General, is a matter of piecing together the puzzle. The handkerchief, the coded note, the murder of young Thomas Reed, these are threads in a tapestry. This new attack on Monsieur Wells adds another thread. Tell me, what do we know of the courier's condition and the precise nature of the attack?" Conway gestured to a chair, and Poirot sat, his posture as precise as ever. Hastings remained, standing, his notebook at the ready. "Wells is recovering in hospital," Conway said. "Took a nasty blow to the head, but he's coherent. He was ambushed around 10 last night, just after leaving the War Office. The alley was poorly lit, and the assailant wore a mask. Wells only caught a glimpse of the limp as the man fled. No other distinguishing features, I'm afraid." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "And the documents, their contents?" "Trade agreements," Conway replied, his voice low. "Details of tariffs and naval cooperation. Nothing as critical as the naval defense plans, but damaging enough. If they fall into enemy hands, we've tightened security, but the damage is done. Whoever this traitor is, they have access to our most sensitive operations." Poirot nodded, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. "And Colonel Blake," he said, his tone casual but pointed. "He walks with a cane, does he not? A war injury, I believe." Conway's brow furrowed. "Blake. Yes, he was wounded in the Boer War shrapnel in the leg. But surely you're not suggesting—" "I suggest nothing," General Poirot interjected smoothly. "I merely observe. A limp is a distinctive trait, and Colonel Blake is among those under suspicion. We must verify his movements last night. Was he, perhaps, at the War Office?" Conway shook his head. "No, he was at a regimental dinner at the Savoy. Dozens of officers can confirm it. Blake's a gruff old sod, but he's loyal to the core. I'd stake my career on it." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Loyalty, General, is a virtue often claimed but not always proven. We shall verify this alibi. In the meantime, I should like to speak with Monsieur Wells, if he is well enough." The hospital ward was stark. Its white walls and antiseptic sent a stark contrast to the opulence of the War Office. Martin Wells, a wiry man in his 30s with a bandaged head, sat propped up in bed, his face pale but alert. Inspector Japp stood nearby, his notebook open, his expression one of barely concealed frustration. "Mr. Poirot," Wells said, his voice hoarse but steady. "I've told the inspector everything I remember. It happened so fast. I was walking to the station, cutting through an alley to save time. Someone came up behind me, didn't hear a thing until the blow landed. Next thing I knew, I was on the ground, and the bastard was limping off with my satchel." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Wells. "This limp, Monsieur Wells. Describe it, if you please. Was it pronounced a dragging of the foot, perhaps, or a slight hesitation?" Wells frowned, his brow creasing with effort. "Hard to say, sir. It was dark, and my head was spinning. But it wasn't a heavy limp, like someone crippled. More uneven, like they were favoring one leg. Could have been a trick of the shadows. But that's what I saw." Poirot nodded, his expression inscrutable. "And the mask? Any details?" "The shape, the material. Cloth, I think," Wells said. "Dark, maybe black. Covered the whole face, except the eyes. I didn't get a good look, happened too quick." Jap grunted, snapping his notebook shut. "Not much to go on, Poirot. A masked man with a limp could be anyone. We've got men patrolling the area, but the thief's long gone by now." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "Patience, my dear Jap. The thief may be gone, but he has left us a clue. The limp. It is a detail that speaks, if we listen. Tell me, Monsieur Wells, did you notice anything else? A scent, perhaps? The sound of a voice?" Wells shook his head, wincing slightly. "Nothing, sir, just the pain in my skull and the sight of that limp. I'm sorry, I can't be more help." "You have been most helpful," Poirot assured him, rising from his chair. "Rest, monsieur. We shall ensure this villain does not strike again." As they left the hospital, Hastings glanced at Poirot, his curiosity evident. "You're awfully focused on that limp, old chap. Think it's Blake?" Poirot's eyes twinkled with amusement. "You leap to conclusions, Hastings, like a hare. In a field, the limp is a clue, yes, but it may not be what it seems. A limp can be feigned, mon ami, just as a handkerchief can be planted. We must consider all possibilities. Colonel Blake's alibi at the Savoy must be examined, and we must also consider the other suspects. Lord Ashford, Lady Vernon, Sir Edward, each has their secrets, their motives. The Savoy was a bastion of elegance, its dining room a symphony of crystal chandeliers and starched linens. Poirot and Hastings arrived in the late afternoon, the lunch crowd long gone, leaving only a few waiters tidying up. The head waiter, a portly man named Mr. Grayson, greeted them with a deferential nod. "Colonel Blake, you say?" Grayson said, consulting a ledger. "Yes, he was here last night for the regimental dinner. Arrived around 7, stayed until, well, I'd say, past 10. A lively affair, sir. Lots of toasts and speeches." Poirot's gaze was sharp. "Past 10, you say, and Colonel Blake was present the entire time?" Grayson hesitated, his brow furrowing. "Well, now that you mention it, sir, I believe he stepped out for a bit. Said he needed some air. Must been around 9, maybe 9:15. He was back before the speeches ended, though." Hastings exchanged a glance with Poirot, his excitement barely contained. "That's it, then. He could have slipped out, attacked Wells, and been back in. Time for dessert." Poirot raised a hand, his expression calm but firm. "Not so fast, Hastings. An absence of a few minutes does not a traitor make. We must confirm the timing. Monsieur Grayson, this dinner, were there many guests? Could someone have left unnoticed?" Grayson nodded. "Oh, aye, sir. It was a big to 50 officers, maybe. More people were coming and going all evening. Colonel Blake wasn't the only one to step out for a cigar or a breath of air." Poirot thanked the waiter and led Hastings back to the street, his pace brisk. "The alibi is not as solid as General Conway believes," he said. "But we must not be hasty. The limp, the mask, the timing, these are pieces of a puzzle, but they do not yet form a picture. We must dig deeper." Their next stop was the War Office archives, a labyrinth of filing cabinets and dusty ledgers overseen by a bespectacled clerk named Miss Harrow. Poirot requested personnel files for the 4 suspects, as well as any records relating to Thomas Reed and Martin Wells. Miss Harrow, efficient but wary, complied after a stern note from General Conway. The files revealed little new about Lord Ashford, whose gambling debts were already known, or Lady Vernon, whose expertise in cryptography was unmatched. Colonel Blake's file confirmed his war. Injurious shrapnel wound to the right leg, requiring a cane for long distances. Sir Edward Langley's file, however, caught Poirot's eye. A footnote mentioned a recent promotion, accompanied by a substantial salary increase. Yet his lifestyle remained modest, almost suspiciously so. "Curious," Poirot murmured, closing the file. "Sir Edward has the means to live grandly, yet he does not. Where does his money go, I wonder?" Hastings frowned. "You think he's being paid off? By the same people who got to Reed?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, "or perhaps he is cautious, hiding his wealth to avoid suspicion. We must watch him closely." That evening, Poirot and Hastings dined at a quiet restaurant near Baker Street, the case weighing heavily on their minds. The clink of cutlery and the murmur of other patrons provided a soothing backdrop as Poirot outlined their next steps. "We must consider the limp as both a clue and a deception," he said, slicing his steak with precision. "If Colonel Blake is the traitor, his injury makes him an obvious suspect, too obvious, perhaps. A clever man would use such a detail to mislead. And yet, if the limp is genuine, we must ask who else might share this trait, or who might imitate it." Hastings chewed thoughtfully. "What about the mask?" "Wells said it was cloth, not some fancy disguise. Sounds like something anyone could whip up in a hurry." "Precisement," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "The mask and the limp are theatrical elements of a performance. The traitor wishes to direct our attention, to make us chase shadows. But Hercule Poirot does not chase shadows. We shall set a trap of our own." The plan took shape over the next few days. Poirot proposed leaking false information about a new defense initiative, a fictitious plan for an anti-submarine weapon. The details would be shared with the 4 suspects, but in slightly different forms, allowing Poirot to trace any leak back to its source. General Conway approved the plan, though he remained skeptical of its success. "We're dealing with a cunning devil," Conway warned. "They've outsmarted us twice already. What makes you think they'll fall for this?" Poirot's smile was serene. "Because, General, the traitor is confident. They believe they have outwitted us, and confidence breeds mistakes. We shall watch, and we shall wait." The false documents were prepared with meticulous care, each version containing a unique code word that would identify the leaker. Lord Ashford received a document mentioning Operation Trident. Lady Vernon's version referenced Project Aegis. Colonel Blake's cited Plan Sentinel. And Sir Edward's mentioned Operation Vanguard. The documents were distributed under the guise of a routine briefing, with Japp's men discreetly monitoring the suspects' movements. As they waited for the traitor to act, Poirot and Hastings revisited the alley where Martin Wells had been attacked. The narrow passage, flanked by grimy brick walls, was deserted save for a stray cat slinking through the shadows. Poirot paced the cobblestones, his eyes scanning every detail: the scuff marks on the ground, the faint smear of mud on a wall, the glint of broken glass in a corner. "Look here, Hastings," he said, crouching near a drain. He pointed to a faint imprint in the mud, a partial footprint, uneven, as though the walker had favored one leg. "This may be our limping assailant. The mark is fresh, no more than a day or two old." Hastings squinted at the print. "Could be anyone's, Poirot. This alley's used by half the vagrants in London." "Perhaps," Poirot said, rising. "But it is a detail, and details are the lifeblood of our work. We shall have Japp's men analyze this print. It may tell us more than our friend Wells could." The analysis of the footprint yielded little a common boot size. No distinctive markings, but it kept Japp's team busy, combing the area for additional evidence. Meanwhile, Poirot turned his attention to the suspects' personal lives, dispatching Hastings to discreetly inquire about their habits and associates. Lord Ashford, it turned out, frequented a gentleman's club known for high-stakes card games, his debts mounting despite his charm. Lady Vernon was a recluse outside her work, her only regular contact being a sister in Cornwall. Colonel Blake spent his evenings at regimental functions or alone in his study, his war injury limiting his social engagements. Sir Edward, however, was a mystery. His evenings were unaccounted for, his modest flat revealing little beyond a collection of fine silk ties and a locked desk drawer. A locked drawer, Poirot mused when Hastings reported back. "What does Sir Edward hide, I wonder? We must find a way to see inside." Their chance came sooner than expected. Sir Edward, eager to prove his loyalty, invited Poirot and Hastings to his office to discuss the false defense plan. While Sir Edward stepped out to fetch a file, Poirot deftly picked the lock on the desk drawer, skill Hastings had long since ceased to question. Inside was a ledger, its pages filled with cryptic entries, dates, sums of money, and initials that matched no one at the War Office. "Blackmail, perhaps," Poirot said, his voice low, "or payments to a foreign contact." "We must be cautious, Hastings. Sir Edward is more complex than he appears." Before they could examine the ledger further, Sir Edward returned, his face paling as he saw the open drawer. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice trembling. Chapter 7. The alibi puzzled. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of the War Office, casting long shadows across the polished oak floors. Hercule Poirot stood in the centre of General Sir Alister Conway's office, his small, meticulous frame dwarfed by the towering bookshelves and the weight of the secrets they contained. His moustache twitched slightly as he surveyed the room, his sharp, green eyes darting from the General's stern portrait on the wall to the papers neatly stacked on the desk. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal companion, stood near the window, his hands clasped behind his back, his face a mixture of curiosity and impatience. Chief Inspector Japp, less composed, paced near the door, his heavy footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. "Well, Poirot," Japp said, stopping abruptly and folding his arms, "you've got us chasing shadows. Colonel Blake's alibi for the night of the courier attack seems solid. Regimental dinner, dozens of witnesses. What's your angle here?" Poirot raised a finger, his expression serene yet commanding. "Mon cher Japp, an alibi, like a fine wine, must be examined closely. for its authenticity. It is not enough that it appears solid, it must withstand the scrutiny of the little grey cells. Colonel Blake says he was at this dinner, but what does it mean to be present? Was he there in body and spirit, or did he, perhaps, slip away, unnoticed? Hastings frowned, turning from the window. Slip away, but the waiter confirmed Blake was there. Poirot said he saw him at the head of the table, grumbling about the soup being too cold. Precisement, Poirot replied, his voice smooth as silk. The waiter saw him, but for how long? A man may be seen at the beginning of an event, and yet, by the end, he is elsewhere, Nan. We must verify the details, the precise moments. A man with a limp, as our assailant was described, does not move with the speed of youth, but a man like Colonel Blake, with his military precision, might orchestrate such a deception. Japp rubbed his chin, skeptical but intrigued. You're saying Blake could have left the dinner, attacked the courier, and got back without anyone noticing? That's a stretch, even for a strategist like him. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Stretch, perhaps, but not impossible. Let us proceed with order and method. We shall visit the regimental dinner's venue, interview those who were present, and examine the timeline. And then, me as Amos, we shall request the personnel files of all involved, Blake, Reed, and our other suspects. There may be connections, yet unseen. The trio set out for the Carlton Hotel, a grand establishment in the heart of London where the regimental dinner had taken place. The hotel's facade loomed with Victorian elegance, its stonework carved with intricate details, its windows gleaming. Under the midday sun, inside, the air smelled of polished wood and cigar smoke, and the staff moved with the quiet efficiency of those accustomed to serving the elite. The manager, a wiry man named Mr. Pembroke, greeted them in the lobby. His thin moustache quivered as he spoke, clearly unnerved by the presence of a detective as renowned as Poirot. We're honoured to assist, sir, he said, bowing slightly. The regimental dinner was held in our Wellington suite, a fine event. Very dignified. Colonel Blake and his men were most particular about the arrangements. Bon, Poirot said, nodding. I wish to speak with the staff who served that night. The waiters, the maître d'hôtel, anyone who might recall the movements of Colonel Blake. Pembroke led them to a small office behind the reception desk, where two waiters and the maître d' awaited. The first waiter, a young man named Henry, was nervous, his hands fidgeting as he recounted the evening. Colonel Blake was there, sir, no doubt about it. He gave a speech at the start, all about the regiment's history. Gruff sort of chap, but everyone listened. I saw him at the table most of the night. Most of the night, Poirot repeated, his tone gentle but probing. But not all. Tell me, Monsieur Henry, did you see him leave at any point? Henry hesitated, glancing at the maître d', who stood ramrod straight, his expression unreadable. Well, sir, I couldn't say for certain. It was a busy night, lots of plates to clear, wine to pour. I might have missed him for a bit. The second waiter, an older man named George, spoke up. I saw him step out, sir. Around 9 o'clock, I reckon. Said he needed some air. Didn't think much of it, gentlemen. Often step out for a smoke. Poirot's eyes narrowed. 9 o'clock, you say? And how long was he gone? George scratched his head. 10, maybe 15 minutes. He was back before the desert course. I know that much. Japp exchanged a glance with Hastings, his eyebrows raised. 15 minutes, Japp muttered. Enough time to get to the courier's route and back, if he was quick. Poirot turned to the maître d', a stern man named Mr. Wallace. And you, monsieur, did you observe Colonel Blake's movements? Wallace's voice was clipped. Precise. I was overseeing the service, Mr. Poirot. My attention was on the staff, not the guests. But I can confirm the Colonel was present for the speeches and the main course. Beyond that, I cannot say. Poirot nodded, his expression inscrutable. Merci, you have been most helpful. Now, I should like to see the layout of the Wellington suite and the exits available to the guests. Pembroke led them to the suite, a grand room with high ceilings, chandeliers, and long tables still set with crisp linens from a recent event. Poirot paced the room, his steps measured, his eyes scanning every detail, the windows, the doors, the distance to the street outside. He paused at a side door leading to a narrow hallway. This door, he said, pointing. It leads where? To a service corridor, Sir Pembroke replied. It connects to the kitchens and the rear entrance. Guests don't usually use it, but it's not locked. Poirot's moustache twitched. A discreet exit, then. A man could leave through this door, reach the street, and return without drawing. Attention, most interesting. Back at the War Office, Poirot requested the personnel files of Colonel Blake, Thomas Reed, and the other suspects Lord Ashford, Lady Vernon, and Sir Edward Langley. General Conway, though reluctant to share sensitive records, agreed under the weight of Poirot's reputation. The files were delivered to a small, secure room where Poirot, Hastings, and Japp pored over them, the air thick with the scent of old paper and ink. Colonel Blake's file was thick, detailing a distinguished career marred only by a war injury. That left him with a limp. A decorated man, Hastings remarked, flipping through the pages. Medals, commendations, a strategist of the highest order. Hard to imagine him turning traitor. And yet, Poirot said, the heart of man is not revealed by medals alone. His injury, this limp, interests me. The courier's assailant had a limp, but was it genuine, or was it, perhaps, a performance to mislead? Japp grunted, leafing through Reed's file. This clerk, Thomas Reed, nothing remarkable. Young, ambitious, worked under Lady Vernon. In cryptography, no disciplinary issues, no debts, no obvious reason to be mixed up in espionage. But that coded note you found, Poirot, it's got to mean something. Poirot agreed. The note suggests Reed was more than a mere clerk. He was involved, perhaps unwillingly, in the traitor's scheme. We must consider his connections. To our suspects, Lady Vernon, for instance, she claimed no personal knowledge of Reed, yet their work in cryptography binds them. Hastings frowned, holding up Ashford's file. What about Ashford? His gambling debts are no secret. A man in debt might be tempted to sell secrets. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Lord Ashford's debts are a motive, yes, but we must not leap to conclusions. The handkerchief with his initials, too convenient, too obvious. A clever traitor might use such a clue to divert suspicion, and Sir Edward his nervousness during our interviews. His tailored suits matching the silk of the handkerchief, these are threads we must weave together. The afternoon stretched into evening as they combed through the files. Poirot's attention lingered on Blake's military record, particularly a brief mention of a posting in Berlin before the war. Berlin, he murmured, a city of spies. Even then, and Colonel Blake, with his strategic mind, would have learned much in such a place. Japp looked up, intrigued. You think Blake's got foreign contacts from his Berlin days? It is possible, Poirot said. We must cross-reference his postings with known espionage activity, and we must speak to Blake again. His alibi is not as ironclad as he believes. The next morning, Poirot and Japp arranged a second interview with Colonel Blake at his office in the War Office. The colonel sat behind his desk, his cane resting against the chair, his expression a mix of irritation and defiance. His weathered face, lined from years of service, betrayed no guilt. But Poirot's keen eyes missed nothing. "Colonel Blake," Poirot began, his tone polite but firm. "You have told us you were at the regimental dinner the entire evening of the courier's attack. Yet a waiter recalls you stepping out for some time. Perhaps you can clarify." Blake's jaw tightened. "I told you, I was there. Speeches, dinner, the lot. If I stepped out for a moment, it was to clear my head. War injuries, Mr. Poirot, they don't just affect the leg. The mind, too, needs respite." Poirot tilted his head, studying the colonel. "A respite, oui. But 10 or 15 minutes is time enough for a man of your discipline to accomplish much. The courier was attacked not far from the Carlton Hotel. A man with a limp or one pretending to have one might have reached the scene and returned." Blake's eyes flashed with anger. "Are you accusing me, sir? I've served this country for 30 years. I'd sooner die than betray it." And yet Poirot said softly, "The evidence suggests a traitor among us. If not you, then who? You must understand, Colonel, I seek only the truth." Blake leaned forward, his voice low. "You're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot. Look, to Ashford his debts are no secret. Or Vernon, she's got that sharp mind, always playing her own game. I'm a soldier, not a spy." Poirot smiled faintly. "A soldier, oui, but soldiers too can be cunning. I thank you for your time, Colonel. We shall speak again." As they left Blake's office, Hastings whispered, "He's a tough nut, Poirot. Do you really think he's our man?" Poirot's expression was unreadable. "The Colonel is a man of discipline, Hastings, but discipline can mask deception. His alibi is fragile, and his limp real or feigned remains a question. But we must not focus solely on him. The personnel files may yet reveal more." Back in the secure room, Poirot continued his study of the files, his fingers tracing lines of text as if they held the key to the mystery. He paused at a note in Reed's file, a brief mention of a family connection in Berlin Moon, a cousin who worked at the War Office. "Most curious," Poirot murmured. Reed's cousin, a low-level clerk, had access to restricted areas. Perhaps he was used as a pawn in the traitor's game. Japp raised an eyebrow. "You think someone higher up manipulated Reed?" "It is possible," Poirot said. "A junior clerk does not act alone in matters of espionage. He was a tool, perhaps, for someone with greater power and access." The day wore on, filled with interviews and paperwork. Poirot's mind worked tirelessly, piecing together the fragments of the case. The handkerchief, the coded note, the limp, the dinner, the personnel files were threads in a tapestry of betrayal. But the pattern was not yet clear. That evening, as they sat in Poirot's flat, Hastings voiced his frustration. "It's like a maze, Poirot. Every lead seems to point in a different direction. Ashford's debts, Vernon's cipher, Blake's limp, Sir Edward's nerves. How do you make sense of it?" Poirot sipped his tisane, his eyes distant. "The little grey cells, Hastings, they work even when the path seems unclear. The traitor is clever, but no one is invisible to her. Poirot, we must look beyond the obvious, beyond the handkerchief and the limp. The truth lies in the details, the small, overlooked details. He set down his cup, his expression resolute. Tomorrow we shall pursue the personnel files further and revisit the scene of the courier's attack. There is a clue we have missed, I am certain, and when we find it, the alibi puzzle will be solved. The night settled over London, the city's lights flickering like stars against the dark. Poirot sat in silence, his mind a whirlwind of thought, while Hastings and Japp exchanged theories, unaware of the intricate web Poirot was weaving in his mind. The traitor was close, so close, but the final piece of the puzzle remained just out of reach. Chapter 8. Lady Vernon's secret. The morning air in London carried a crisp edge, the kind that made Hercule Poirot pull his coat a little tighter around his shoulders as he stepped out of his flat. The city was alive with its usual hum horse-drawn carriages clattering over cobblestones, vendors calling out their wares, and the distant whistle of a train from Victoria Station. But Poirot's mind was elsewhere, focused on the tangled web of deceit he was unraveling at the War Office. The investigation into the leaked naval defense plans had grown more complex with each passing day, and now a new thread had emerged. Lady Margaret Vernon, the brilliant but enigmatic codebreaker, had been hiding something. Poirot and Captain Hastings had spent the previous evening poring over the details of the case. The monogrammed handkerchief with the initials R.A. had pointed to Lord Reginald Ashford, but Poirot's instincts told him it was too convenient, too neatly placed at the crime scene to be trusted. The coded note found in Thomas Reed's desk, written in a cipher matching Lady Vernon's design, had shifted Poirot's attention to her. And then there was Colonel Blake's limp, suspiciously aligned with the description of the masked assailant who attacked the courier. Sir Edward Langley, with his nervous demeanour and cooperative facade, was not above suspicion either. The four high-ranking officials, Vernon, Blake, and Langley, formed a puzzle that Poirot's little grey cells were determined to solve. Mon ami, Poirot said to Hastings as they walked toward the War Office, we must proceed with the utmost care. The traitor is clever, and they are watching us as closely as we watch them. This Lady Vernon, she is not what she seems. Her denial of a personal connection to Reed, it does not sit well with Poirot. Hastings nodded, his brow furrowed. She's sharp as a tack, Poirot, but if she was mentoring Reed, why lie about it? It makes her look guilty. Precisement, Poirot replied, tapping his cane on the pavement. The lie, it is a shield, but for what? Is it to protect herself, or something else entirely? We must discover this something else. The War Office loomed ahead, a grand edifice of grey stone that exuded authority. Inside, the corridors were lined with portraits of stern-faced generals and maps of the British Empire. Poirot and Hastings were ushered into a small, windowless room where Lady Vernon awaited them. She sat at a polished oak table, her posture rigid, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her grey eyes flicked up as they entered, sharp and assessing, like a hawk sizing up its prey. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, she said, her voice cool but polite. I assume you've come to ask more questions about poor Thomas Reed. I've told you all I know. Poirot smiled, his moustache twitching slightly. Madame, it is not what you have told me that brings me here, but what you have not told me. You see, I have learned that you were mentoring young Monsieur Reed in the art of cryptography. Yet, when we spoke before, you claimed no personal connection. This, it is most curious, Nan. Lady Vernon's expression hardened, but only for a moment. She leaned back in her chair, folding her hands in her lap. "I see you've been digging, Monsieur Poirot." "Very well. Yes, I was teaching Thomas some of the finer points of cipher design. He was eager to learn, and I saw potential in him, but it was professional, nothing more. I didn't mention it because it seemed irrelevant to his death." "Irrelevant?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Madame, a young man is murdered. A coded note in your cipher is found hidden in his desk, and you think your connection to him is irrelevant. Come, come, you are too intelligent for such a claim." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I am loyal to the crown, Monsieur Poirot. If you're suggesting I had anything to do with the leaks or Reed's death, you're gravely mistaken." Hastings, standing by the door, shifted uncomfortably. "Lady Vernon, we're not accusing you outright, but you must see how this looks. That note in Reed's deskit was in your cipher. If you were mentoring him, why was he hiding it?" "Lady..." Vernon's gaze flicked to Hastings, then back to Poirot. "I don't know why he hid it. Perhaps he was experimenting, practicing what I taught him. Thomas was ambitious. He wanted to prove himself. Maybe he got in over his head." Poirot tilted, his head studying her. "And yet, Madame, you are protective of your work. I have observed this. Your office, it is locked when you are not there. Your papers, they are never left unattended. This suggests to Poirot that you guard something more than just your ciphers." Her eyes narrowed. "Every codebreaker guards. Their work, our ciphers, protect the nation. If they fall into the wrong hands, the consequences could be catastrophic. Surely you understand that." I understand," Poirot said smoothly. "But I also understand the human heart. And it tells me you are hiding something, Madame. Perhaps it is not treason, but it is something you do not wish Poirot to know." Lady Vernon stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I've answered your questions, Monsieur Poirot. If you have evidence against me, present it. Otherwise, I have work to do." Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm but firm. "One moment, Madame. Before you go, I must ask about a phrase. The eagle's nest. Does it mean anything to you? For..." A split second, Lady Vernon's composure faltered. Her eyes widened, and her breath caught, though she quickly recovered. "I've never heard of it," she said, her tone flat. "Now, if you'll excuse me." She swept out of the room, leaving Poirot and Hastings in silence. Hastings turned to Poirot, his eyebrows raised. "Did you see that? She definitely knows something about the eagle's nest." "Oui, mon ami," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. "And that reaction, it tells me we are close to something important. Come, we must search her office. If Lady Vernon is hiding a secret, it may be there." The War Office was a labyrinth of corridors and locked doors, but General Conway had granted Poirot access to the suspect's offices. Lady Vernon's was a small, meticulously organized space, its walls lined with bookshelves filled with treatises on mathematics and cryptography. A heavy oak desk dominated the room, its surface bare except for a neatly stacked pile of papers, and a locked drawer. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he produced a small set of lockpicks from his Paquita tool he carried for such occasions. Much to Hastings' surprise, "Poirot, are you sure about this?" Hastings whispered, glancing nervously. "At the door, if we're caught." "We will not be caught, mon ami," Poirot said, his fingers working deftly at the lock. "And if we are, I will explain that it is in the service of the crown. Au revoir." The drawer clicked open, revealing a small notebook and a folded letter. Poirot opened the notebook first, his eyes scanning the pages. It was filled with complex ciphers, some in Lady Vernon's precise handwriting, others in a looser script that Poirot recognized as Reed's. "This confirms it," he murmured. She was indeed working closely with Reed, but why conceal it? He turned to the letter, unfolding it carefully. The paper was thin, almost translucent, and the words were written in a hurried scrawl. "Meet me at the Eagle's Nest, 9 p.m. Tomorrow. Urgent. R." Poirot's moustache twitched as he read it again. "The Eagle's Nest," he said softly. And this R, could it be Red, or perhaps another? Hastings peered over his shoulder. "It's got to be Red. Don't you think?" But what was he doing meeting someone at a place like that? And why didn't Lady Vernon mention this? Perhaps because she did not receive this letter, Poirot said thoughtfully, or perhaps because she did, and it is part of her secret. "We must find this Eagle's Nest, Hastings. It may hold the key to everything." They left the office, locking the drawer behind them to avoid suspicion. Outside, the London sky had darkened, a light drizzle beginning to fall. Poirot hailed a cab and gave the driver an address in Whitehall, where Inspector Japp was waiting. To discuss the case, the cab rattled through the streets, and Poirot sat in silence, his mind turning over the clues like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Japp was in his usual gruff mood when they arrived at his office. A cluttered room filled with files and the faint smell of tobacco. "Well, Poirot, what's this about Lady Vernon?" he demanded, leaning back in his chair. "You think she's our traitor?" "Not yet, mon ami," Poirot said, settling into a chair. "But she is hiding something, and I believe it is connected to Thomas Reed. Tell me, have you heard of a place called the Eagle's Nest?" Japp's eyebrows shot up. "The Eagle's Nest? Blimey, Poirot, that's a rough spot. It's a pub in the East End, known for being a meeting place for all sorts of shady characters. Foreign agents, smugglers, you name it. If Reed was mixed up with that lot, he was in deep. Poirot nodded, his expression grave. "Then we must go there, Inspector. Tonight, if Lady Vernon or Reed was meeting someone at this pub, we may find the next piece of the puzzle." That evening, Poirot, Hastings, and Japp made their way to the East End. The Eagle's Nest was a dimly lit establishment tucked down a narrow alley, its sign weathered and barely legible. The air inside was thick with smoke and the smell of cheap ale. Rough-looking men sat at tables, their conversations hushed as the newcomers entered. Poirot, in his immaculate suit and polished shoes, looked utterly out of place. But his eyes were sharp, scanning the room for any sign of recognition. They took a table in the corner, ordering drinks to blend in. Hastings leaned close to Poirot, whispering, "Do you think Lady Vernon would really come to a place like this?" "Perhaps not in person," Poirot replied, his voice low. "But her cipher, her pupil, her secrets, they are connected to this place. Listen, mon ami, and observe." For an hour, they watched the comings and goings of the pub's patrons. Most were locals, but a few stood-out men in dark coats who spoke in low tones, their accents foreign. Poirot's attention was drawn to two men at the bar, their heads bent close together. One was tall and thin, with a scar across his cheek. The other was shorter, with a nervous energy that reminded Poirot of Sir Edward Langley. Their conversation was too quiet to hear, but Poirot caught a single phrase, "the handkerchief trick." His eyes narrowed. "Hastings," he whispered, "did you hear that?" Hastings nodded, his face tense. "What's the handkerchief trick? Do you think it's about the one we found?" "Possibly," Poirot said, "but we must not act rashly. We will watch and wait." Before they could move closer, the two men finished their drinks and slipped out a side door. Poirot rose to follow, but Japp grabbed his arm. "Hold on, Poirot. If we chase them now, we'll tip our hand. Let's see if they come back." Reluctantly, Poirot agreed. They stayed another hour, but the men did not return. As they left the pub, Poirot's mind was racing. The handkerchief, the cipher, the eagle's nest was all connected, but the picture was still incomplete. Lady Vernon's secret was at the heart of it, and he was determined to uncover it. Back at his flat, Poirot paced the floor, his hands clasped behind his back. "Hastings," he said at last, "we are dealing with a mind that is both cunning and desperate. The handkerchief was a plant, I am certain of it. But by whom? And this eagle's nested is a place where secrets are, traded like currency. Lady Vernon's cipher reads note. The meeting mentioned in the lateral point to a conspiracy that goes deeper than we imagined." Hastings rubbed his temples. "But where does Sir Edward fit in? Or Blake? Or Ashford, for that matter? We've got too many suspects and not enough answers." "Patience, mon ami," Poirot said, a faint smile on his lips. "The answers, they will come. Tomorrow we will confront Lady Vernon again, and this time Poirot will not be so easily dismissed." The next morning they returned to the war. Office Lady Vernon was in her office, her expression one of barely concealed irritation as Poirot and Hastings entered. "Monsieur Poirot, this is becoming tiresome," she said. "I've told you everything I know." "Not everything," Madame Poirot said, his tone polite but unyielding. "You see, I have found a letter in your office mentioning a meeting at the Eagle's Nest. And last night, I overheard a conversation there about the handkerchief trick. These are not coincidences, I think." Lady Vernon's face paled, but she held his gaze. "You had no right to search my office," she said, her voice low. "But since you've pried, I'll tell you this. I received that letter, yes, but I didn't go to the meeting. It was from Reed, and I thought it was about his training. When I heard he was dead, I assumed it was a trap. I didn't want to be implicated." "And yet you kept the letter," Poirot said, his eyes boring into hers. "Why, madame? If it was innocent, why not show it to the police?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening round the edge of her desk. "Because I wasn't sure who to trust. This office, this investigation, it's a nest of vipers. Someone here is a traitor, and I didn't want to be the next one found in an alley." Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but intense. Then, "Help me, madame, tell me what you know. If you are innocent, you have nothing to fear from Hercule Poirot." For a long moment she said nothing. Then, slowly, she reached into her desk and pulled out another notebook, this one filled with more ciphers. "These are my private notes," she said. "Reed was working on a new cipher, one I hadn't approved. I think he was trying to impress someone outside the War Office. That's all I know." Poirot took the notebook, his fingers brushing the pages. "Merci, madame. This is a start. But I warn you, if you are withholding more, Poirot will find out." As they left the office, Hastings let out a low whistle. "She's a tough one, Poirot. Do you believe her?" "I believe she is telling part of the truth," Poirot said. "But only part. The eagle's nest, the handkerchief, the cipher, they are pieces of a larger game, and we are not yet at checkmate." The investigation continued, with Poirot's mind working tirelessly to connect the dots. The eagle's nest had given them a glimpse into the shadowy world of espionage, but the traitor remained elusive. Lady Vernon's secret was only the beginning. and Poirot knew that the next move would be critical. The game was far from over, and the little grey cells were only just beginning to unravel the truth. Chapter 9. The Eagle's Nest. The London fog hung heavy in the air, a thick, swirling curtain that seemed to conspire with the city's secrets. Hercule Poirot adjusted his overcoat, his gloved hands brushing against the fabric as he stepped out. Of the hansom cab, the faint glow of gaslights flickered through the mist, casting long shadows on the cobblestone street. Beside him, Captain Hastings shivered slightly, pulling his scarf tighter around his neck. The chill of the evening was not merely physical, it carried the weight of their mission, a clandestine pursuit that could unmask a traitor in the highest echelons of British power. "Are you quite certain about this, Poirot?" Hastings whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant clatter of hooves and the low hum of the city. "This place the eagles nested doesn't exactly scream." Respectable establishment. Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. "Mon ami, it is precisely in such unassuming places that the most profound secrets are exchanged. The eagle's nest. It is not a nest for eagles, but for vipers, perhaps. We shall see." They stood before a narrow, unremarkable building tucked between a shuttered butcher's shop and a tobacconist's. The pub's sign, a faded depiction of an eagle clutching a branch, swung creakily in the damp breeze. Its windows were grimy, the light within dim and uninviting. To the casual passerby, it was just another seedy pub in a city full of them. But to Poirot, it was a stage, and the players within might hold the key to unraveling the web of treachery that had ensnared the War Office. Jap had been the one to tip them off. After days of fruitless leads, the inspector had received a report from one of his informants, a nervous, twitchy fellow who frequented the city's less savoury haunts. The Eagle's Nest, he'd claimed, was a known rendezvous for those dealing in information that ought not to see the light of day. Foreign agents, smugglers, and even disgraced aristocrats had been known to pass through its doors, exchanging whispers over pints of tepid ale. When Poirot had learned of the cryptic letter found in Lady Vernon's office mentioning a meeting at the Eagle's Nest, he had seized upon it with the fervour of a bloodhound catching a scent. "Jap's men are positioned nearby," Poirot said, his voice low but steady. "They will not interfere unless I signal. We must be discreet, Hastings. Our quarry is cunning, and the smallest misstep could send them scurrying into the shadows." Hastings nodded, though his brow furrowed with unease. "I still don't like it. If this is a meeting place for spies, we're walking into a lion's den. And with that handkerchief business still unresolved, do you really think the traitor will show their face here?" Poirot's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "The handkerchief, mon ami, is a thread in the tapestry, but not the whole picture. Tonight, we seek not just the traitor, but the connections, the threads that tie them to their masters, the Eagle's Nest is where those threads may converge." With a final glance up and down the street, Poirot pushed open the heavy wooden door. A wave of stale air greeted them, thick with the mingled scents of tobacco, spilled beer, and damp wool. The interior was as uninviting as the exterior promised. Low ceilings, scarred wooden tables, and a handful of patrons hunched over their drinks. A barman with a weathered face and a missing tooth stood behind the counter, polishing a glass with a rag that looked no cleaner than the floor. Poirot and Hastings took a table in the corner, half hidden by a sagging curtain. Poirot ordered a brandy, though he barely touched its hand. Hastings settled for a pint, more to blend in than out of any real desire. The other patrons paid them little mind, save for a grizzled sailor who glanced their way before returning. to his muttered conversation with a man in a patched coat. "Now what?" Hastings murmured, leaning closer to Poirot. "Do we just sit here and hope someone starts reciting state secrets?" "Patience, Hastings," Poirot replied, his gaze sweeping the room. "We observe, we listen. The little grey cells, they are at work even when the eyes see nothing of note." For nearly an hour they sat in silence, the murmur of conversation around them punctuated by the occasional clink of glasses or the scrape of a chair. Poirot's eyes, sharp and unyielding, darted from face to face, noting every gesture, every glance. Hastings, try as he might, found his attention wandering. The pub was oppressively warm, the air heavy with the weight of unspoken deals. Then, just as Hastings was beginning to fidget, the door creaked open, admitting two men. They were unremarkable at first glance, one tall and lean, with a scarf pulled high over his chin, the other shorter, with a slouch that suggested a life spent ducking authority. They took a table near the back, far from the bar, and ordered drinks in low, clipped tones. Poirot's posture stiffened ever so slightly, a signal to Hastings that something had caught his attention. "Did you see that?" Poirot whispered, his voice barely a breath. "The taller one, he carries himself with the air of a man who knows he is watched." Hastings squinted through the haze. "They look like ordinary blokes to me. What's got your hackles up?" Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on the table. "The way they sit, Hastings, not facing each other, but angled, as if to watch the room. And the shorter one, he keeps his hand in his pocket, perhaps on a weapon. These are not men here for a casual pint." The two men spoke in low tones, their words indistinguishable from the general hum of the pub. But Poirot's keen ears caught something, a phrase, perhaps, or a cadence that made him lean forward. He gestured for Hastings to remain silent and tilted his head, straining to hear. "The handkerchief trick worked like a charm," the shorter man said, his voice carrying just enough for Poirot to catch it. "He's got them chasing their tails." The taller man grunted, his scarf slipping slightly to reveal a sharp jawline. "Good, but we need the next batch by Friday. The boss isn't patient." Hastings' eyes widened, and he opened his mouth to speak, but Poirot's hand shot out, gripping his wrist under the table. The warning was clear, not a sound. Poirot's mind was racing, piecing together the fragments of what he'd heard. The handkerchief trick could only refer to the monogrammed silk found near Thomas Reed's body, the clue that had pointed so conveniently to Lord Ashford. Was it a deliberate plant, as Poirot had begun to suspect? And if so, who was orchestrating this game of misdirection? The two men continued their conversation, their voices dropping even lower. Poirot strained to hear more, but the words were lost in the ambient noise. He needed to get closer, but any movement now risked drawing attention. Instead, he focused on their faces, their gestures, committing every detail to memory. The taller man's scarf, he noted, was of fine wool, not the coarse fabric one might expect in such a place. The shorter man's boots were caked with mud, but the soles were new, suggesting recent travel or perhaps a hurried escape. Suddenly, the shorter man's head snapped up, his eyes locking onto something or someone at the bar. Poirot followed his gaze and saw a third figure, a man in a dark overcoat, slip through a side door into what appeared to be a private room. The two men at the table exchanged a glance, then rose abruptly, leaving their drinks untouched. They moved toward the same door, their steps purposeful. "They're on the move," Hastings whispered urgently. "Should we follow?" Poirot hesitated, weighing the risks. To follow too closely might expose them. To wait too long might mean losing the trail entirely. We follow, but with care, he said at last. Stay behind me and do not speak, unless necessary. They rose, Poirot, moving with the deliberate grace of a man accustomed to blending into any setting. He adjusted his hat, tilting it to obscure his face, and gestured for Hastings to keep his head down. The side door led to a narrow hallway, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. The air was colder here, damp with the scent of mildew and old. Wood, at the end of the hall, a staircase descended into darkness. Poirot paused, listening. Faint voices drifted up from below, too muffled to make out. He motioned for Hastings to stay close and began to descend, his polished shoes silent on the worn steps. The staircase opened into a small, windowless room, its walls lined with crates and barrels. The two men from the pub stood near a table, joined now by the man in the overcoat. Their voices were low, urgent, but Poirot caught fragments of their conversation. The plans are secure, the man in the overcoat said, his accent clipped and foreign, but we need confirmation. The War Office is tightening its grip. The taller man nodded. Our man's in place. He'll deliver. Poirot's heart quickened. Our man, the traitor then, was still active, still feeding information to these shadowy figures. But who? Lord Ashford, with his gambling debts and missing handkerchief. Lady Vernon, with her ciphers and secretive demeanour. Colonel Blake, with his limp and questionable alibi. Or Sir Edward, whose nervous cooperation masked something deeper. Before Poirot could hear more, a loud creak echoed through the room. Hastings, in his effort to get closer, had stepped on a loose floorboard. The three men froze, their heads whipping toward the sound. Poirot pulled Hastings back into the shadows, his hand clamping over his friend's mouth. Who's there? The shorter man barked, his hand darting to his pocket. Silence followed, thick and oppressive. Poirot's mind raced, calculating their options. They were outnumbered, and the narrow staircase offered little room for escape. But he could not let this opportunity slip away. With a swift motion, he stepped into the light, his demeanour calm and authoritative. Messieurs, he said, his voice carrying the quiet confidence that had disarmed countless adversaries. I am Hercule Poirot, and I believe we have matters to discuss. The three men stared, momentarily stunned. The taller one recovered first, his hand moving toward his coat, but Poirot raised a hand, his gaze piercing. I would not recommend that, he said softly. My associate, Inspector Japp, is not far, and his men are most efficient. It was a bluff, Japp's. Men were stationed outside, not close enough to intervene immediately, but it had the desired effect. The men hesitated, exchanging wary glances. The man in the overcoat stepped forward, his face half hidden by the brim of his hat. You're meddling in things you don't understand. Monsieur, he said, his voice low and menacing. Leave now, and you might walk away. Poirot smiled, unruffled. I understand more than you think. The handkerchief, for instance. A clever trick, but not clever enough. And the plans you speak of, they will not leave this country, I assure. You, the shorter man lunged, but the taller one grabbed his arm, pulling him back. Not here, he hissed. We can't risk it. With a final glare, the three men moved as one, bolting for a door at the far end of the room. Poirot made no attempt to pursue. He knew Japp's men would be watching the exits. Instead, he turned to Hastings, who was pale but unharmed. That was a close shave, Hastings muttered, wiping his brow. Did you get anything useful out of that? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Oh yes, mon ami, more than you know. The handkerchief trick, the mention of our man, these are pieces of the puzzle. The picture, it begins to take shape. They made their way back to the street, where Jap was waiting, his face grim. Lost M, he admitted, frustration evident in his voice. They slipped out through a back alley. My men are combing the area, but I'm not hopeful. Poirot nodded, unperturbed. It is no matter, Jap. They have confirmed what I suspected. The traitor is close, and they are growing careless. We are nearing the endgame. As they stepped back into the fog, Poirot's mind was already at work, sifting through the clues, the faces, the words. The eagle's nest had not yielded the traitor's identity, but it had given him something equally valuable: certainty. The web was tightening, and soon the little grey cells would bring the truth to light. The night stretched on, and Poirot and Hastings returned to their lodgings, the weight of the evening's events hanging heavy between them. Hastings, ever the optimist, tried to lighten the mood as they sat by the fire in Poirot's impeccably tidy sitting room. Well, at least we're still in one piece, he said, nursing a glass of whiskey. Though I must say, Poirot, you've got a knack for walking into danger and coming out with a smile. Poirot sipped his tisane, his expression serene. Danger, Hastings, is merely the stage on which the truth performs. Tonight, we have seen the actors, heard their lines. Now, we must study the script. Hastings frowned, setting his glass down. You mean the handkerchief trick? You think it's definitely a plant, then? To throw us off Ashford's scent? Perhaps, Poirot said, his fingers steepled. Or perhaps it is more complex. The handkerchief points to Ashford, yes, but also to Sir Edward, whose tailor matches the silk. And yet, the limp we heard of it suggests Colonel Blake, and Lady Vernon's cipher, her connection to Reed. All these threads, they tangle, but they lead somewhere. Hastings shook his head, bewildered. It's a devil of a mess, Poirot. How do you keep it all straight? Poirot's smile was almost indulgent. Order and method, mon ami. The little grey cells, they do not falter. We must now consider the motives, the opportunities, the lies. The eagle's nest has shown us that the traitor is not alone. They have allies, a network, but networks, they have weak points. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Poirot's eyes, sharp and unyielding, seemed to see, beyond the room, beyond the fog-choked streets of London, to the heart of the conspiracy. Hastings watched him, marvelling at the quiet intensity of the man who could unravel the most intricate of mysteries with nothing more than observation and logic. What's our next move? Hastings asked, leaning forward. Poirot's gaze returned. To the present, his expression resolute. We set a trap, Hastings. The traitor believes they are clever, untouchable. But they have made a mistake. They have underestimated Hercule Poirot. Tomorrow we shall lay the bait, and we shall see who bites. As the clock struck midnight, Poirot rose, his movements precise and deliberate. Rest now, mon ami. The eagle's nest was but a skirmish. The true battle lies ahead. Hastings nodded, though sleep seemed a distant prospect. The fog outside had thickened, but in Poirot's mind, the path to the truth was growing clearer by the moment. The eagle's nest had been a revelation, a glimpse into the shadows. Now, it was only a matter of time before the traitor's mask was torn away. The following morning dawned grey and damp, the fog lingering like a stubborn guest. Poirot was up early, his breakfast of hot chocolate and brioche, consumed with the precision of a ritual. Hastings, bleary-eyed but resolute, joined him at the table, where a map of London lay spread out, marked with pins and notes. "The Eagle's Nest," Poirot said, tapping a pin on the map, "is a nexus. But it is not the only one. The men we saw last night, they are intermediaries, not the masterminds. We must now focus on the War Office, on our 4 suspects. One of them is the key." Hastings rubbed his chin, thinking, "You're sure it's one of the 4? Couldn't it be someone else entirely, someone we haven't considered?" Poirot shook his head. "Nan, Hastings. The leaks, they are too precise, too sensitive. Only someone with access to the highest levels could provide such information. Lord Ashford, Lady Vernon, Colonel Blake, Sir Edward, one of them is our traitor. The Eagle's Nest has confirmed this. But how do we narrow it down?" Hastings pressed. "The handkerchief, the limp, the cipher, they all point in different directions." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "That, mon ami, is the beauty of the puzzle. The clues, they are not meant to point directly. They are meant to distract, to confuse. But the little grey cells, they see through the fog. We shall use the traitor's own tactics against them." He outlined his plan, daring Gambit to leak false information, a fabricated defense plan that would tempt the traitor to act. By controlling the flow of information, Poirot hoped to catch the culprit in the act, exposing their connections and their methods. It was a risky move, one that required precision and trust in Japp's men to monitor the outcome as they prepared to leave for the War Office. Poirot paused, his hand on the door. "Hastings," he said, his voice soft but firm, "tonight, at the Eagle's Nest, we came close to danger. But danger, it is a teacher. It has taught me that our traitor is desperate, and desperation leads to mistakes. We shall be ready." Hastings nodded, his resolve strengthened by Poirot's unshakable confidence. The Eagle's Nest had been a shadowy battlefield, but the war was far from over. With Poirot leading the charge, the truth could not remain hidden. For long, the War Office was a hive of activity when they arrived. Clerks bustling about with files and telegrams, officers striding purposefully down marble corridors. General Sir Alistair Conway greeted them in his office, his face etched with worry. "Any progress, Poirot?" he asked, his voice low. "The leaks are becoming more frequent. We're losing ground." Poirot inclined his head. "Progress, General, is like the tide, it moves beneath the surface before it is seen. I have a plan, but it requires your cooperation." He explained the trap, outlining the false defense plan and the need to monitor the suspects closely. Conway listened intently, his military mind appreciating the strategy, though his unease was palpable. "You're playing a dangerous game, Poirot," he said. "If this goes wrong, it could compromise everything." Poirot's smile was serene. General Hercule Poirot does not play games. He solves puzzles, and this puzzle, it is nearly complete. As they left Conway's office, Poirot's thoughts returned to the Eagle's Nest, to the men in the shadows, to the words that had drifted through the stale air. The handkerchief trick, our man, the pieces were there, waiting to be assembled. And Hercule Poirot, with his order and method, would not rest until they were. The day passed in a flurry of preparations, Poirot coordinating with Japp to ensure every detail was in place. The false plan was drafted, a convincing mix of technical jargon and strategic misdirection. It was circulated to the 4 suspects, each given access under the guise of routine duties. Now, all that remained was to wait and to watch. As evening fell, Poirot and Hastings returned to their lodgings, the tension between them palpable. The eagle's nest had been a turning point, a moment when the traitor's shadow had briefly flickered into view. Now, with the trap set, the final act was approaching. Poirot sat by the fire, his eyes distant, his mind a whirl of calculations. "Hastings," he said at last, "tonight we have seen the enemy. Tomorrow we shall meet them face to face." And with that, he retired to his room, leaving Hastings to ponder the enigma that was Hercule Poirot, man who could walk into the darkest corners of London and emerge with the truth in his grasp. Chapter 10. A trap is set. The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of Hercule Poirot's London flats, casting a soft glow over the meticulously arranged furniture. The air was thick with the scent of brewing tisane, a ritual that insisted upon even in the midst of a case as grave as this. Hastings sat across from him, his brow furrowed, a newspaper crumpled in his hands. The headlines screamed of yet another diplomatic embarrassment, though none yet hinted at the true scale of the leaks plaguing the War Office. Poirot, however, was not reading the paper. His eyes were half closed, his fingers steepled, and his mind those famous little grey cells, word with a plan. "Hastings, mon ami," Poirot said, breaking the silence. "The time for observation alone is past. We must act, and act decisively. The traitor, he is cunning, but even the most cunning fox will step into a trap if the bait is irresistible." Hastings leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "A trap, Poirot? You mean to flush out the traitor?" "Precisement," Poirot replied, his voice smooth as velvet. "We shall create a fiction, a piece of information so tantalizing that the traitor cannot resist acting upon it. And when he does, we shall have him." The plan, as Poirot outlined it, was both elegant and audacious. The War Office would be informed that a new, highly sensitive defense plan had been drafted, a blueprint for an advanced coastal defense system, codenamed Tidebreaker. This plan, however, would be entirely fictitious, a carefully crafted lie designed to lure the traitor into revealing themselves. The key was to control who had access to this false information and to monitor their actions closely. Any move to pass the information to a foreign power would expose the culprit. "But how do we ensure only the suspects see it?" Hastings asked, scratching his head. "And how do we know who leaks it?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "We shall be selective, mon ami. The document will be presented to our 4 suspects: Lord Ashford, Lady Vernon, Colonel Blake, and Sir Edward Dunder, the guise of a confidential briefing. Each will receive a version of the document with a unique identifier, a subtle variation that will allow us to trace any leak back to its source. As for observation, we shall rely on our good friend Inspector Japp and his men to watch their every move." Hastings nodded, though a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "It's a risky game, Poirot. What if the traitor doesn't take the bait?" "Then, Hastings," Poirot said, rising from his chair with a flourish, "we shall know that. Our fox is even more cautious than we thought. But I do not think so. The traitor is greedy, desperate even. He will act." The meeting at the War Office was arranged with the utmost secrecy. General Sir Alister Conway, his face etched with worry, agreed to Poirot's plan, though not without reservations. "This is a dangerous game, Mr. Poirot," he said, pacing the oak-panelled room. "If word gets out that we're fabricating defense plans, it could undermine confidence in the entire ministry." General Poirot replied, his tone calm, but firm. "Confidence is already undermined. The leaks have seen to that. What we propose is the only way to restore order and expose the serpent in your midst." Conway relented, and the stage was set. The 4 suspects were summoned to a private briefing room in the War Office, a chamber deep within the labyrinthine building, its walls lined with maps, and its air heavy with the weight of secrets. Poirot stood at the head of the table, his small frame commanding the room with an authority that belied his stature. Hastings stood by his side, notebook in hand, while Japp lingered near the door, his sharp eyes scanning the faces of the suspects. Lord Reginald Ashford entered first, his tailored suit immaculate, his smile as polished as ever. "Mr. Poirot," he said, inclining his head, "I trust this summons means progress in your investigation." "Indeed, Lord Ashford," Poirot replied, his tone neutral. "All will be revealed in due course." Lady Margaret Vernon followed, her steps brisk, her expression guarded. She nodded curtly to Poirot and took her seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Colonel Harold Blake limped in next, his cane tapping rhythmically against the floor. His gruff demeanor was unchanged, though his eyes darted nervously to the others. Finally, Sir Edward Langley arrived, his face pale, his fingers fidgeting with the cuff of his sleeve. He offered a weak smile and sat, avoiding eye contact. General Conway began the briefing, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are here because you are among the few trusted with the highest level of clearance in this office. What I am about to share is of the utmost importance to national security. The details of Project Tidebreaker, a new coastal defense system, have been finalized. You will each receive a copy of the preliminary report for review." As Conway spoke, Poirot watched the suspects closely. Ashford's smile never wavered, but his fingers drummed lightly on the table. Lady Vernon's eyes narrowed, as if analyzing every word. Blake sat rigid, his jaw clenched, while Sir Edward's hands trembled slightly as he accepted his copy of the document. The reports, prepared under Poirot's meticulous direction, were identical in content, but for one detail: each contained a unique code name for a fictitious naval base mentioned in the plan. Ashford's report referenced Port Elysium, Vernon's Cape Vanguard, Blake's Fort Meridian, and Langley's Haven Sentinel. If the information was leaked, the code name would reveal the source. After the briefing, Poirot and Hastings retreated to a small office nearby, where Japp had set up a makeshift command center. "My men are already in place," Japp said, pointing to a map of London pinned to the wall. "We've got eyes on Ashford's townhouse, Vernon's flat, Blake's club, and Langley's office. If any of them makes a move, we'll know." "Good," Poirot said, adjusting his tie. "But we must also consider the indirect routes. The traitor may not act personally. He may use a courier, as with the attack on the diplomatic pouch. We must be vigilant, Inspector." The first day passed without incident. Hastings, restless, spent much of it pacing the flat, while Poirot sat in his armchair, sipping tisane and staring into space. "Patience, Hastings," he said when his friend grumbled about the lack of progress. "The traitor is cautious, but he is also pressed for time. The foreign power will demand results, and our bait is too tempting to ignore." On the second day, Japp reported that Lord Ashford had been seen dining at his usual club, but nothing suspicious had occurred. Lady Vernon had remained in her office, working late, while Colonel Blake had visited a military hospital, ostensibly to see wounded comrades. Sir Edward, however, had left his office abruptly in the afternoon, taking a cab to a nondescript bookshop in Soho. "A bookshop," Hastings said, raising an eyebrow. Sounds like a cover for something. Perhaps, Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. But we must not jump to conclusions. Tell me, Inspector, what did Sir Edward do at this bookshop? Japp consulted his notes. He browsed for about 20 minutes, bought a copy of some poetry anthology, and left. My man followed him back to his office. Nothing out of the ordinary. Poirot's lips twitched into a faint smile. Poetry, you say? Most interesting. Sir Edward does not strike me as a man with a passion for verse. We shall keep a close eye on him. That evening, Poirot and Hastings paid a visit to the bookshop themselves. It was a cramped, dusty place, its shelves overflowing with second-hand volumes. The proprietor, an elderly man with a stoop, remembered Sir Edward's visit. Nice fellow, he said. Asked for a specific book, something by Tennyson, paid in cash, and left.